Well, anyone with gray hair would recognize that music, the theme from Patton, George C. Scott, one of the great movies ever made. I know that they've come out with others that are a little more realistic in terms of the action and all that kind of stuff, but the music behind that theme speaks for an entire generation of gray hairs, and I can let you know that was a must see for a young, a middle-aged, or even an elderly man when that movie came out. So we start today with our show, Take Five with Steven Travers, and welcome everybody. Logan Landers is our producer and engineer. This is 100 Yards of Football, but today we've got a very special guest. And Steven, we're going to begin with you. You've had a relationship with our guest today, and Bob Case is not only a friend, but he's one of those guys that you want to know. You're glad that you've got a guy like him on your side of the locker room, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I've known Bob since 1994, and so regarding that, the walk-up music, had I been a major league ball player with the ability to have walk-up music, that would have been what I would have had playing as I was coming onto the mound or coming to the plate, the theme from Patton. And as you mentioned, anybody of our age can certainly relate to that. I believe I think it's the greatest movie ever made, my humble opinion. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about baseball, boxing, Southern California, and the great Bob Case. So, Bob, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be on with, I call Steve Mr. SC because he's written more books on SC than anybody that I've ever heard of. But anyways, honor to be on with Steve and my new friend Harper, who we have the Notre Dame connection, and it's so great to know that you knew Greg Goosen, who was one of my best friends, and I think about him often. But it's an honor to be on this show.
Well, let's talk about that. Your roots from California. I'm in the San Fernando Valley most of my early life, and it used to be orange tree orchards. There was a big a farm that was right the 405 near Nordhoff that you could smell it from miles and miles away. The San Fernando Valley changed quite a bit, but Glendale, right? I know your home was there. Were you born and raised? And tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I was born in Los Angeles. Raised in LA. Grew up Glendale, Pasadena area, and I unfortunately I came from a family, Irish Catholic family of full-blown alcoholics. So when I was a young kid, to escape the family, I'd go down to Casey Stengel Field, which was in Glendale, right across from Glendale College, and I would be the bat boy and the ball boy for the Brooklyn Dodger rookies, which was managed by Lefty Phillips, and Larry Sherry, Norm Sherry, and Don Drysdale played for them. And this is in the 50s, mid-50s. And then I was the bat boy for the Portland Beavers, who had spring training in Glendale all 3 years. So that's how I got my start in baseball when I was 10, 11, and 12.
Wow.
And then when the Angels came out here in 1962, I got a job as the visiting clubhouse guy for the Los Angeles Angels, in charge of equipment and uniforms and all that stuff. So then I was also the assistant for John Fitzpatrick, who was the head equipment guy.
Wow. There's a whole show just in that. Do me a small favor, though, just for clarity's sake. You mentioned the Brooklyn Dodgers in the mid-50s. Before they came and became the LA Dodgers, were there signs that Brooklyn was going to leave New York and come to Los Angeles that you became aware of when you were just a toddler?
I just heard about it when I grew up a Hollywood star and an LA Angel fan and the San Francisco Seals. The Pacific Coast League was like the big leagues when I was a kid. So Steve Bilko was my idol as a kid. He was a big fat guy that played first base and won the Triple Crown every year. So growing up here, we didn't want the big leagues out here. They used to call the Coast League the third major league because you had, guys who get promoted from the Hollywood Stars to the Pirates and they wanted to stay in Hollywood. Why would you want to go from Hollywood to Pittsburgh? Yeah. But, the point being, they were the AAA affiliates of all those teams, and it was a wonderful, glorious time. So most people didn't want the Dodgers to move out here. And they moved out in 58. And when I was the bat boy for the Brooklyn Dodger rookie team, it was 55, 6, and 7. And that's why Kenny Myers and Lefty Phillips ran the team. And they hired me as the bat boy. And I was playing catch with Don Drysdale when I was 11 years old.
Oh, my gosh.
So, and how about Larry Sherry was a better hitter than his brother Norm, who was a catcher. And Larry was the MVP of the 59 World Series. So
Yeah.
I was growing up around these guys, and I remember in '59, I said, Larry Sherry's the MVP of the World Series. Are you kidding me? And he was this guy that was like a father to me. They went to Fairfax High School, both of them, and so it was just a great time. And then that's what got my start working in the clubhouses and being around it. And that's why the Angels hired me in '62, because they knew I had the background, and they were looking for somebody. And so George Goodale was their PR guy that really helped me, and Fred Haney.
Be real quick with two questions to follow up. You mentioned there was hesitation about West Coasters of having the league expand or have the major leagues come out west. There was nothing west of Kansas City in those days, right?
That's
You got
exactly
Cleveland. There's nothing in Texas. The league was so much smaller than it was, or than it is now. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, in terms of your recollection of, what, we kind of like being private. We don't need to have the affiliation with Major League Baseball.
Baseball fans out here, the papers, they covered the Coast League probably bigger than they did the Dodgers. I mean, every day it was Steve Bilko was in the headlines, and that TV show Sergeant Bilko, Phil Silvers, was named it after Steve Bilko. So the bottom line, it was just a great time. And Hollywood Stars, the owner of the Stars, was Robert Cobb, and that's what he owned, the Brown Derby, and that's where the Cobb salad came from the Brown Derbies. And he was married to an actress, Gail Patrick. And you go to the Hollywood Star game, and there'd be Burt Lancaster here, Groucho Marx here. I mean, it was just a great time. They played at Gilmore Field, which is now 3rd and Fairfax, where the CBS studios are. But I mean, it was a wonderful time. Those are some, what they always say, what's the greatest era in the history of baseball? And the answer is when you were a kid. And that was, my favorite era. And the early years of the Dodgers and the Coliseum, I loved that time.
My coach, Sonny Lubick at Colorado State University, who we had a chance to interview yesterday, said one of his great experiences in his life, he was from Butte, Montana. His sister moved out to Laguna Beach. He had an afternoon off. He went to the Coliseum, and he got to see his favorite players from the Brooklyn Dodgers, and that was his team, play in the LA Coliseum with that 50-foot fence for left field. Yep. It was a short perch. He got to see Sherry and Roseboro, as you mentioned, and Duke Snyder in center field, and just some of these great guys.
Gil Hodges, Pee Wee Reese.
Absolutely. All of them in the early couple of years here. And Bob, I don't want to skip by that without saying what an amazing time. I'm going to call it a decade, when there were no teams. And then before you know it, Los Angeles gets the Dodgers, San Francisco gets the Giants, the A's, the Padres, Atlanta gets a team. The Brewers move from Milwaukee to Atlanta, and then the Brewers, another organization starts there. Who am I missing? There's so much growth. Buffalo, whether it be basketball or football or baseball, the growth of sports between the mid-50s to the mid-60s was explosive in terms of all these cities getting some form of a major league football, basketball, hockey, or baseball team.
You're absolutely right. And the Padres came into existence in '69 and the Mets came. I mean, it was like the Dodgers and the Giants were 1958. They were the first two here. And the Angels came into existence in '61. They played in Wrigley Field, downtown LA, their first year, and they moved to Dodger Stadium in '62, '63, '64, and '65.
And you were working for them during that time, correct?
I worked for them. How about this? I was working for the Angels '62, '63, '64, and '65 at Dodger Stadium. Okay, they moved to Anaheim in '66. So in the middle of the '65 season, Casey Stengel said, "Bobby, are you going to drive from Glendale to Anaheim every day to hang up jock straps?" I said, "Casey, I don't have a job." He said, "Bobby, I'm going to give you a job. You're my business manager." So it was like the best break I ever got in my life. It was the best. And I was with him for every day of his life for the last 10 years of his life. I was a pallbearer at his memorial. And, it was just an amazing, lovely time traveling with him. We stayed at the Essex House in New York. It was he was just a great guy and a fun guy. And he really, if it wasn't for Casey, I don't know what would have happened to me in my life. I really don't.
Share with me the real quick story about Casey, in that my first recollection of him, I'm probably 8 years old, and I see him at an old timers game, and he's got a jersey that has every one of the organization's logos from all the clubs that he was slowing down a little bit, but he would show up everyone would want to pat him on the back, go shake his hand. The love that the players showed for him at all levels was absolutely amazing. So I don't know much about the player, Casey Stengel. I don't know much about the early manager. I just know that the admiration that people had later on in his life was something that anyone would want. There's that jersey. Look at that. Isn't that the coolest thing?
That's when he was just. Let me just tell you this: baseball was his life. He was a left-handed dentist, and he went to dental school, but they didn't make equipment for dentists, so he signed to play baseball. In 1912, he broke in with the Brooklyn Dodgers. In his first game, he went 4 for 4. And he hit the first World Series home run ever recorded in Yankee Stadium with the 1921 New York Giants when he played for John McGraw. So he had a 285 lifetime batting average in his career, 84. And he had a tremendous career. He had 360 and 3 World Series. Tremendous career, and then he managed and he loved baseball. I'm going to tell you guys a story. This is a great story about, you see a lot of these arrogant athletes today. One day he called me up. It was probably 1965. He was still with the Mets, and he would call people and say, "Hey Bob, are you busy now?" And it's just the way he'd go. He wouldn't even identify himself. "Pick me up at LAX at 11 p.m. Slam. So I go down to LAX. I pick him up. 11 p.m. at night. There's like 100 kids waiting out there for his autograph, like 100 kids. And I didn't even know, he wasn't with the team. I don't even know how they knew he was there. But he sat there at 11 p.m. and signed autographs for every single kid.
Yep.
And their pennants and their baseball cards and all this stuff. And as we're leaving, I said, "Casey, let me ask you something. Does that bother you?" And he stopped and he looks at me and he says, "Bobby, they are as much a part of baseball as Mickey Mantle, Babe Ruth, Joe DiMaggio, the groundskeeper, the peanut salesman, the ushers, the sports writers." He said, "Without them, I wouldn't have been paid to do what I love my whole life." And I never forgot that. So when I see these guys snubbing kids and all these charging them $100 for an autograph, I always think of that.
Tommy Lasorda had a very similar situation. Are you familiar with Tommy and his affiliation with making sure that the players that were a part of the Dodger organization with him, if he ever caught any of them not signing an autograph for a kid, that was an easy way for you to get out of the locker room, and they'll find a trade and put you somewhere else. Yeah. I appreciate Casey doing that, and for you to value that as well. That's it's a missing art in baseball, isn't it?
100%.
Steven, I've taken most of the interview thus far. I want to make sure that you get at least one question, and I'm teasing there. But your relationship with Bob goes back into the mid-'90s, doesn't it?
It does. But before we get into that, is a couple things I think Bob would like to talk about. Bob went to Muir High School in Pasadena, which is, Bob, is that the same high school Jackie Robinson went to?
Absolutely.
Okay, and you played baseball there with Darrell Evans, who is
he was a sophomore when I was a senior. And we played American Legion together. We played Stan Musial League together. And he was the only sophomore. Muir had 3,600 kids and no ninth grade when I went there.
Oh, you're kidding.
If you made, as a sophomore, I made the JV team, and it was an honor because there's 100 guys trying out for the JV team and only 15 guys made it. So Darrell Evans was, the 3 years I was there, was the only sophomore that made the varsity. And he not only made the varsity, he started. I remember as a senior, I go, "Who the hell's this young kid with zits on his face playing third base?" It was Darrell Evans. So, the bottom line is, and what a great young ball. I mean, and here's the thing. If you told me he would have hit 350 in the majors all the time, I would have believed it, because he was not a power hitter. He'd go to left field, go to right field. Eddie Matthews got a hold of him when he signed with the Braves and made him a power hitter and hit 1,000 ground balls to him a day. And made him go in the batting cage, and he'd intentionally throw at him, and it made him not hit the ground, because that was a sign of weakness to the pitcher if you fell on the ground when they throw at you. So, and Darrell Evans wore number 11 with the Braves. He wanted to wear 41, but it was retired with the Braves. But he went to the Giants and he went to the Tigers. He wore 41 in honor of Eddie Matthews, because that was his guy. And Hank Aaron was his guy too. And Hank Aaron, people would say, "Darrell, you played 21 years in the big leagues. You're never on the DL. You had 400. You're not arrogant." And he said, "How could I be arrogant when I walk in a locker room and see Hank Aaron, one of the most humble, down-to-earth guys in the world. How could I be arrogant? Or Eddie Matthews, or all these guys. And it's really an interesting tale, you know.
Well, Eddie Matthews was a batting instructor of the A's organization when I played for them. But in recent months, I've had some conversations with you, and I must say that I had been under certain impressions, and you corrected me on that. I thought that you got the Angels job because you lived next to Rod Dedeaux and you were Justin Dedeaux's friend, but apparently it's not quite that way. Tell me about how you got to know Rod Dedeaux and how Casey Stengel got into that mix, and also Justin Dedeaux, who was the son of Rod Dedeaux, who played at USC and was an assistant coach. Tell me about that relationship when you're in your early days.
Casey lived on Grandview in Glendale. He moved in the house in 1923. It was almost a mansion, and he lived there until he passed away in 1975. Now, 2 blocks over was Highland. Rod Dedeaux lived on the corner of Highland, and 4 doors up from him was the all-time great Dodger hitter, Babe Herman, who died in 1987. Babe was a dear friend of mine since I was a kid, and so was, and I met Rod through Casey Stengel, and Justin, of course. All the years I worked for Casey, Justin was around, and we were hanging out together and everything. So, you know, they were like family. Casey loved Rod Dedeaux. I'm going to tell you a story. Casey signed Rod Dedeaux to his first contract in 1935 at Griffith Park. He was the Hollywood High School Player of the Year, and he signed him to a contract. Rod Dedeaux, Casey was managing the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1935. Rod Dedeaux played with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1935 for Casey Stengel. You can look him up. Played 1935, had 3 or 4 games. Then he got hurt. Now he got hurt, and that turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to him. He went and bought a gas station in Glendale and bought a couple trucks, which later became Dart Trucking and Transportation with over 2,000 trucks, internationally doing Sears warehousing, everything. He became a multimillionaire, and he drew $1 a year coaching at SC for 45 years, $1 a year. So he did it because he loved it. And Casey loved Rod Dedeaux. He used to always say to me, we'd go down to Dedeaux Field and watch. Casey and I would go down and watch the 70s Trojans down there. And I remember Casey used to always say, that guy's got class. That Rod Dedeaux, he's got class. He's a good guy. Yeah. You know, but Rod was over at his house all the time. And so was Babe Herman. And Yogi Berra would come out and visit when he was in LA. I mean, it was like, at his house, he would entertain. People would knock on the door at his house and say, "May I have your autograph? I'm out visiting out here from Vermont." And Casey would say, "Come on in." Pour him a drink, show him his trophy room and everything. That was Casey Stengel. You know, I mean, he was just a great guy. I say he's the greatest ambassador in baseball history. You guys are too young to know that much about him, but he, you know, when you talk about an ambassador, this guy was the face of the, you know, he made the cover of Life magazine. He made the cover of Time magazine. He made the cover of Newsweek. He made Sports Illustrated many times. He made Sport magazine. He was like, you know, back then, he was the biggest name. When I was working for him, his name was with DiMaggio and all those names.
Well, he played through all of them, right? I mean, my grandmother died when she was 88 years old, and she was born in 1899. And I said, you were born before the Wright brothers flew in Kitty Hawk. You had to learn Morse code when you were in high school. You went through, you knew what it was like when the Titanic sank. I mean, all this amazing history of innocence and change, of the massive amount of change. And Casey is the same way as what you're telling me, Bob. He's playing in the majors in 1912. Are you kidding me? He saw Ty Cobb. He probably yelled at him one day, and he knows what Babe Ruth smelled like when he would run by.
He played against Babe Ruth in the 1916 World Series. The Brooklyn Dodgers played the Boston Braves, and Babe Ruth was pitching for the Braves.
Yes. All of this. I mean, what an amazing wealth. And you probably, with your experience, and we'll ask in a second how you first met him, but when you're working for the gentleman later on, I'm sure he can't wait to tell you stories. What a wealth of knowledge and a book to be written from all the things that Casey would remember just out of the blue. Hey, let me tell you that story in 1945.
That's
when
right.
Ted Williams walked by, and then I said, "Hey Ted, good luck in the army, or you got to go fly airplane." I mean, I'm throwing stuff out there, but what an amazing time, Bob! You were a part of that.
I was so honored, and it was like, what I tell people. There was a movie, Cary Grant and David Niven and Loretta Young were in this movie called The Bishop's Wife, where Cary Grant played an angel on earth, walking around helping people. And I feel that I have been blessed in my life to have angels around me, even in my drinking days. Bo Belinsky, Dean Chance, Casey Stengel, Sam McDowell. I've had all these angels, and I call them angels. And you don't think I thank God every day for? If it wasn't for Casey Stengel, I could be in prison now. You know what I mean? And that's the facts. So everything good in my life today, I owe to all these angels, including my sobriety, which Sam McDowell and Bo Belinsky are the main two guys that got me sober. So 41 years ago. So I wouldn't have seen 50. So yeah. I'm just grateful.
I think I want to get to that, but let me just make this observation. You talk about Casey as an ambassador of baseball. 3 men come to mind when you're talking about real ambassadors of baseball, and tell me whether you agree. I say Casey Stengel, Branch Rickey, left field duel, and Jackie Robinson. Of course, Jackie went to your high school for various different reasons. Those are 4 people who made America truly our national pastime.
100%.
Now, let me, you mentioned Bo Belinsky, and so I think it's probably a good time for me to break in on how you and I met, and it's because of Bo Belinsky. We'll get into some Bo Belinsky stories, but we've talked about Bo on this show, and Harper knows this. In 1994, I meet Bo Belinsky by phone and decide that I want to write a screenplay about his life. And I'm talking to him, and I say to Bo, well, who can you give me the phone number of some people I can talk to who know a lot about you and maybe can help put me in touch with some other people who grew up with you and knew you with the Angels and knew you. And first words out of his mouth, he says, Bob Case. So I call you, Bob. This is 1994. And I say, and you don't know who I am. And you say, and I say, Bob, I'm writing a screenplay about Bo Belinsky. And really what you easily could have said to me at that time was, well, why you? What do you know about Bo Belinsky? I grew up with Bo Belinsky. I know a lot of writers who probably know more about Bo Belinsky than you. Who do you think you are to write about Bo Belinsky? But you didn't say that. I think you sensed immediately that I really knew a lot about him just from reading about him, having read the works of Maury Allen and Pat Jordan, a few other people, and that I had a real fascination and love for this character. And you were so helpful to me. Why don't you start off right from the beginning? Because we talked about you had a neighbor named Charlie Sheen. And tell me what Charlie Sheen said when he came into your house. He would come into your house to buy memorabilia, and he saw a picture of Bo Belinsky. What did Charlie Sheen say at that point?
I was shocked because Charlie's younger, and he said, I love that guy. He said, I love that guy. And that's when we said, he would be perfect to play Bo Belinsky. And as Steven said earlier to me privately, he said, Charlie would have been perfect because he was a pitcher and they could reverse it on the screen. He was a pitcher in high school. Charlie loved baseball with all his outside problems and issues. He really loved the game of baseball. I mean, he really did. And anybody that loves baseball, I like. You know what I mean? Anybody, because and Charlie, and I knew Steven really knew what he was talking about. When I checked out Steven Travers, my God, I'd already read a couple of his books, and I had him on my shelf when I first met him. I thought, wait a minute, he wrote the Bobby Bonds book, or Barry Bonds book, a great book on Barry Bonds. I think it was a bestseller, but he did a lot of great stuff. And so I said, this guy, would be a great guy to do this whole thing.
Yeah, we definitely bonded. And so we bonded over Bo Belinsky. And just to put Charlie Sheen, unfortunately, he was not able to produce that movie and star in that movie for various reasons. And we don't really need to get into that. A lot of people know the Charlie Sheen story. It is unfortunate because he was a perfect age and he was the perfect guy. He kind of looked like Bo. But let's get to Bo Belinsky. Okay. This is one of the fascinating characters of my life. We devoted an entire show to my relationship with him. And when I say a relationship with him, it started when I was 12 or 13 years old, just reading about it, being fascinated by. Today, in fact, the great Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys passed away. And Brian Wilson, when I think of Brian Wilson, and this gets to Bo and my relationship with this whole story, Brian Wilson is, he's the Odyssey, he's something out of Greek drama. That is to say, there's a story of mermaids who are the sirens who draw these ships to the shores, and that was Southern California. And I would read about Bo Belinsky and the lifestyle he was leading and the fun he was having and the music of the Beach Boys and the beaches and Sunset Boulevard. And it was a 1960s vibe that just struck me, and you lived it. So talk about being just a teenager. You come into the orbit of Robert Bo Belinsky, his role in your life. Let's start from the beginning. Mr. Case.
Okay, from the beginning in spring training, 1962, what was I? I was 16 years old. Then I turned 17 in August. Anyway, Bo Belinsky was the most hyped before he ever played for the Angels because he was holding out. He came to Palm Springs. They had a huge press conference with girls in bikinis, and you didn't talk about your outside life in baseball in 1962, but they were talking about his girlfriends and what a womanizer he was, and he was a pool shark, one of the great. He beat Luther Lassiter and Doug Balthus in pool. I mean, the guy was a pool. He could play any level of pool you wanted to play, and you'd think you'd beat him. He was a hustler. I'm going to tell you one story, and then I'm going to go back to this. We're going to Pasadena he lived in Malibu at the time. We're driving to Pasadena. He says, let's stop off at this pool hall on San Fernando Road. It was like a blue collar pool. So we go up. He gets nobody knew it was Bo Belinsky. He gets a cue off the thing, rolls it on the table to make sure it's not crooked, and he challenges these guys to some pool games. He's $450 ahead. No, in the hole. And we didn't have any money. And these guys are like badass construction workers, right? So all of a sudden, all the guy's got to do is sink the 8-ball, and Bo's out money, but we won instead $400. What happened? The guy miscued. So we got in the car and we're driving to Pasadena, and I said, "Oh, what the hell happened? The guy miscued." He said, "Bobby, didn't you see me spit in the chalk?" Anyway, that's just a typical story of,
Bob, I want you to continue with this, but I'll give you a quick aside. I don't know if Bo ever told you this. Bo Belinsky once told me that he played pool with Jim Morrison of the Doors at the Whiskey A Go-Go. You can imagine that scene.
All right, played pool with everybody. Pool with Jackie Gleason.
Give me free flow of, I don't even need to, just wherever you want to go with Bo Belinsky, how you knew him, what it was like.
Okay, well, so then fast forward, I'd heard all this. He believe me, back in those days, he was getting way more hype than Sandy Koufax or Don Dry, and the Angels had no publicity guys on the team. He was in the headlines every day, every single day. He was in the headlines, and I remember back in those days, it was just unbelievable. And he took a liking to me. It's interesting. There was 3 guys in that team that, maybe because I looked like I was much older than 17, and I drank with the guys. Eddie Sadowski was a 2nd or 3rd string catcher. Bo Belinsky and Dean Chance. Those 3 guys took me under their wing. They'd take me out. We'd drink pitchers of beer. They would take me out. And, and the other players are going, why is Bo? I remember Tommy Ferguson said, "I don't want you fraternized with the players." They asked me out. I didn't ask them out. I was a kid. So, the bottom line is all the players said, Bo's taking Bobby out. Well, he just took a liking to me. And, and I watched his lifestyle I didn't even know how to talk to a woman then. I'm looking at we roomed together at the Riviera Hotel in Palm Springs, and he's gone, and all the phone's ringing all night long. Is Bo there? Is Bo there? Is Bo there? Is Bo there? I mean, he dated every rock star: Tina Louise, Jane Mansfield, Ursula Andress, Connie Stevens, Anne Margaret, Mamie Van Dorn. I mean, it goes on and on. The Princess Sonora. I mean, it goes on and on, but some of the more beautiful ones weren't famous. I mean, I saw him with some absolute 10 pluses, so it was just like, so I've always said, and he had BB monogrammed on his shirt, BB monogrammed on his underwear. He dressed cool, his hair slicked back. He had the twinkle in his eye. And I'm going, this guy's the definition of cool to me. Like if you had cool in the dictionary, the word cool, it would be Bo Belinsky. So I go, I want to be like Bo Belinsky. I didn't want to be like Mickey Mantle or Al Kaline or those guys. I wanted to be like Bo Belinsky. And ironically, I was. I got married a bunch of times and divorced, went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and Bo and I would speak back to back at Betty Ford, and I'd say, the reason I'm here, guys, is because he was my idol. And so we just had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun, and he saved my life too. I'm telling you. So there was more. Steve said earlier, and he knows this. There was more words written about Bo Belinsky than any other person in that. And Steve knows this, right? At that time period, headlines every day. He had the guy from New York, Walter Winchell, pimping for him. Walter was a Hollywood columnist. He was setting him up with movie stars, setting him up with chicks, setting him up. Everybody took a liking to him. J. Edgar Hoover liked him. The head of the FBI had him and Dean out to the FBI. I got the picture. Bo, when he passed away, I got a lot of Bo's stuff. I got the picture. But I mean, the bottom line is, it's just was an amazing time in LA. It was still the Sunset Strip and ice cubes and glasses and Cadillac convertibles, and it was just a great time. People still dressed. When you went out to dinner, they weren't wearing Levi's with holes in them and tattoos all over them. They dressed to the nines. It was the era of the stars. The movie stars dressed beautifully. It was an era, just a completely different era. Now you go down to Musso and Frank's on Hollywood Boulevard, and you're lucky to not get your watch stolen. In other words, it's just Sunset Boulevard is there used to be Chasen's and Scandia and La Dome and all these Ciros, and they're all gone.
Wouldn't it be
like
interesting?
That movie Gone with the Wind. They're all gone.
Bob, is there a fairness in saying that, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it was the perfect storm? A guy with talent, a guy with good looks, a guy that made the writers and the media personalities. It all just seemed to mix together, and it turned into this giant aura that Bo got to be a part of because it was the right place at the right time.
Absolutely correct.
Wow.
And he was a character. He was a fun guy. He was a character. He really was. He was a good. I knew then Bo had a beautiful heart. He really had a beautiful heart. I never saw him big league anybody or act like a jerk ever. One day he used to stay with me when my wife would go to Europe. He'd stay with me for like a month at a time from Vegas. We'd go to Malibu every day. One day he had to go to the pharmacy to get a prescription, and it said Robert Belinsky, and the pharmacist says, "You're not any relation to Bo Belinsky?" And Bo kind of smiled and he said, "That's me." The pharmacist went nuts, came across the pharmacy, was hugging him and took pictures with him and everything. I mean, so that's, and that was, 50 years before that all this stuff happened. So
it was kind of Beatlemania, I guess. Yeah, would you say?
That's a very good analogy. Very good analogy. It's the first time any baseball player had ever been affiliated with Hollywood and the glamour of Hollywood. And, he was hanging out with Henry Fonda, Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra. I mean, he was hanging with these guys.
Yeah. Well, Tommy Lasorda would have all kinds of pictures of Sinatra and Martin, as you had mentioned, and the Rat Pack, and he'd get them tickets to the game. But that's number two, right? Bo was number one. Bo was the originator of that type of a relationship, and in a way that was much different than Tommy. Tommy was completely separated from the playing days back then when he was the manager. He was the guy that wasn't Walter Alston, who wanted nothing to do with that, but still a promoter of the game. Is there some fairness in that assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get in. There's a lot of inside stories about him that aren't really, you don't want to talk about on the air. But I can just say this: he said it took Sandy Koufax to keep him away out of the major leagues. His career, he was 0-4 with a 6.80 ERA, and Koufax never pitched for the Kansas City Athletics, which released him in 3 months. So it's a lot of
Sure, and people forget that Sandy Koufax was one heck of a basketball player, right? He goes to the University of Cincinnati. He was a
basketball scholarship. But what Casey Stengel taught me one thing, and he always said, take care of the little guy. Take care. Well, when you don't pick up tabs and you stiff waiters and waitresses, and you screw a guy, Bill Russell, who was your shortstop for 18 years and got you in 4 World Series, that's not taking care of the little guy, So right. Don't get me going on that. I want to stay off that subject.
Yeah, I love Bill Russell, Mr. Clutch for me, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, everything about it. I'm with you.
But he's one of my best friends. We have lunch every couple of weeks.
Do you really? But pass along that there's one guy that I've just met. His name's Harper LeBel, that absolutely loved what you were able to do for the organization, and you deserve your.
He had a higher
accolades.
winning percentage as a manager than Lasorda. He had a higher look it up. He had a higher, and Lasorda, when Russell, who got him in 4 World Series, was managing, was saying to the media that Bobby Valentine would make a good Dodger manager.
Oh, I know.
So don't get me going on that guy.
Yeah,
because it's not going to be pleasant.
And as humble as the day is long, right?
Yeah, exactly. The sweetest, nicest guy. One of my all-time favorites. Him and Rick Money were my 2 favorites in that era.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, we'll talk about the lineup in a little bit, but let's. I want to continue. You go to the Angels, and they leave the Coliseum. Remember, they played there, and then they go play at Dodger Stadium. Then
the Dodgers played at the Coliseum.
The Angels never played there?
No, they played at Wrigley Field on 42nd and Avalon, which is where the minor league Angels played for years. And then they played there in 61. And then in 62, they came to Dodger Stadium and shared it with the Dodgers 62, 3, 4, and 5. And then after the 65 season, they moved to Anaheim.
Now, your affiliation is with the Angels only, although you did have ties with the Dodgers. Was that a choice, or was it somebody made the offer?
Nobi Kawano was the equipment manager, and Jim Mewey in the visiting side, and they would, when the Angels were on the road, I would help them, in the clubhouse. So I worked a lot with the Dodgers back then. That's how I knew Al the Bull Ferraro, who was he just passed away. He was one of my dearest friends. Yeah. But I mean, it's like there were so many great guys. I got to know all the players I'd worked the visiting clubhouse for Jim Mewey on the visiting side, and so I got to know all the National League players.
I'm gonna take you to a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old again. And what's it like for you? You hear it. There's a clang that is made when you got all these bats, and Harmon Killebrew or an early Rod Carew or Al Kaline or Mickey and some of the National Leaguers who would be McCovey, Mays. They're coming into the clubhouse all the time, and this has to be a dream come true, especially for a kid that loves baseball as much as you did. But you got to be professional, and you got to ho-hum the whole thing. But it's still got to be you're pinching yourself every time you go to work, right?
In the beginning, I couldn't even talk in the beginning, but after then you see they're just people. They're just right. and ball players, and back then were the most down-to-earth guys. Most of them, they like to drink, they like to stay out at night and stuff. That's the way it was. I used to put 10 cases of beech nut chewing tobacco, Red Man chewing tobacco, snuff. I have 20 different brands of cigarettes, Newports or Marlboros, Winston. I'd have 15 cases of Coors beer every day in the locker room. Yeah. And those are all banned now. The players don't go out. Number one, because of cell phones and everything, everybody's got a camera. They can't go out and have fun. Like they used to close the bars. I used to keep bars open all night, and they just close them. I have the like at 2 a.m. There's a place called the Night Watch in Pasadena. The guy, Tom Sherlock, that ran the bar, he would, when the bar closed at 2, he'd let the players stay until 6 a.m, and I'd drive them back to the Sheraton West Hotel at daylight, 7 a.m.
They'd sleep till 1 or 2, then go to the ballpark and do it all over again, right?
That's the way it used to be.
And
now
one of the other,
they got weight rooms. That's why I say all the injuries are. You go to Dodger Stadium where the Angel Clubhouse used to be, they got a bigger weight room that goes down the whole. I'm talking the NFL. You were an NFL guy. They don't have weight rooms like the Dodgers have. And these guys are pumping iron. Why do you think you have all the injuries? They used to tell you in baseball, and Steve knows this, that you don't lift over 40 pounds. You don't lift over. Nobody was lifting weights then. Nobody.
right.
40. They used to. Joe Adcock used to have this 40-pound weight, and you'd roll it up on a rope, and then roll it down, and roll it up, and roll it. And that was the extent of it.
Yeah.
It was, and nobody was injured. Nobody. Darrell Evans played 21 years in the big leagues and never once was on the DL. He said he and Tony Perez hold the record of everyday players, 21 years, never on the DL.
You mean they never had an oblique that they ever had? Or...
They never had an oblique. They never had it. And look at the Dodgers have 15 players, pitchers.
Just
There's only
pitchers.
10 on the staff. They got 15 on the DL now.
Yeah. Yeah. Look at all the square footage that they had. That could have been used for Coors and Budweiser and some Jack Daniels.
But I'm telling you, the players were more durable then. They really were.
Well, you got to be a part of that for such a long period of time and getting to meet these guys. And again, it goes from they're my heroes to where, look, I'm doing my job and I'm going to make sure that they have everything that they need in a way. Oh, by the way, you did mention something, if you don't mind me saying so. Super Bowl I in Los Angeles.
I worked that Super Bowl. I worked the Super Bowl.
Did you really?
I'm going to tell you, in spring training, Fred Haney, who was from Milwaukee, in Palm Springs, he'd bring in Dad Brazier to come and help us in spring training. Dad Brazier happened to be the equipment manager for the Green Bay Packers.
Yep.
And I would room with him in spring training, and he'd say, Bobby, whenever we come to LA, come on down and help us. So I worked the first Super Bowl, and there was 35,000 people. The Coliseum was half full, with Jim Taylor and Paul Hornung, and Lombardi was one of the nicest gentlemen you'd ever want to meet, a class act. But I mean, so I was very fortunate. At the time they called it the AFC NFC title game. It was
championship game. Yep.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, that was a lot of fun. I wish I knew what I knew then. I just think if I'd gotten Paul or Bart Starr's jersey or something from that game.
Did you take Max McGee out the night before? He almost missed
that's
curfew.
One of the funniest stories. He goes out and he didn't think he was going to play, and Boy Dollar got injured, and he'd been out drunk the night before the whole night. And Boy Dollar couldn't play, and they played him, and he got 2 touchdown passes in the game.
It was almost like a Mickey Mantle moment where they say, "Hey Max, how'd you make that catch?" He goes, "Oh, it's easy. I aimed at the ball in the middle. I was so hungover. Right. I didn't." The thing I was going to make mention of is at halftime, there's a picture of Lenny Dawson in the Chiefs locker room. The doors that open, as you know, those swinging doors like in a restaurant. At the Coliseum, and someone takes a picture of Len Dawson. He's got a Marlboro Red in his mouth, and he's drinking a Fresca. Again, stuff that no one today would ever even consider doing.
They all smoked. They all smoked. The football players.
Thank you, Logan. I say it, and look at that. I mean, he's pulling a drag for that, and he's got to go back out for the second half. And you were there for that. That's amazing. And then they had to have a couple of different bands. I mean, SC and UCLA's band weren't available. So they had some other, was it high school bands? Do you remember?
I really don't remember.
Yeah, I can't either. But wow, what an amazing, I mean, from the 32 Olympics to where they are right now, that building has obviously housed some amazing events. And did you like it for baseball? I would imagine it was just awkward. It wasn't the right place.
Well, you'd see 80,000 people with transistor radios listen to Vin Scully, and he'd say a joke, and the whole stadium would laugh, and the players up at bat wondering what the hell happened. But no, they had that 49-foot screen in left field. It was I'm telling you, those were fun days. I mean, I never saw so many people. They had 93,000 people when Roy Campanella came out, and they all lit candles in the Coliseum. It was an amazing thing. Casey Stengel wheeled them out on the field. It was an exhibition game. And then I was at the World Series in '59. They had 92,000 all 3 games. 92,000 in a baseball game, So
and some of them have no idea what those ants were that were running around the field. They were so far away for a baseball.
It was like a pantomime. That's why everybody had Vin Scully on the radio.
Yeah. You hear the crack of the bat, and you have to wait for Vin to tell you where the ball went.
That's exactly correct.
Okay, so the Angels end up playing in Dodger Stadium. That the grass at Dodger Stadium that first year must have been. I mean, they're playing 162 home games for each of the two organizations.
Well, they had great ground. Chris Duca was a groundskeeper, and they did a great job. And a guy named Bubba, a black guy, they did a great job taking care of that place. I'm going to tell you, and that place was the hardest place to hit home runs. Now think about this: in that stadium, see, the home plate is now where that dugout box is now.
Yeah.
In other words, and the air was very dense. For example, in 1965, the Dodgers won the World Series. Sweet Lou Johnson led the team in homers with 12.
Yeah.
12, and they won the World Championship in 1965. So that shows you Al the Bull Ferrara led the Dodgers in home runs in 67. He was Dodger of the Year. He had 16 homers. So that place was very, very tough to hit home runs in.
I bet you 8 or 10 of those homers were on the road too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And a pitcher's ballpark, because the distance between home plate and where the first or the original design backstop was. There was all kinds of room, and then they've moved the clubhouse closer for obvious reasons. It's a much smaller ballpark now than what it was there. But
hey, Harper, I'm impressed. You're a football guy. You know your baseball.
I know a little bit about Dodger Stadium. You bet. Yeah. For me, Bob, it was this. I'm probably 7 or 8 years old, and you're in the parking lot. You've got your hat on. You got your glove next to you. You what else am I missing? Did I forget anything in the car? You walk through the turnstile. There's a guy going, get your programs here, and he's got that little styrofoam cap on. You go through, you smell the Dodger dogs, but there was something for me, Bob, in seeing the grass in person and smelling everything that was around, the popcorn, the Cracker Jack. It was an event. And as mentioned earlier, there was something magical about a little kid that made baseball bigger than what it ever should have been.
100%.
But it was a goal. It was an aspiration from an athletic standpoint. And I am so humbled that so many other kids felt the very same way in Kansas City or Cincinnati or in Pittsburgh or even now in Miami. The kids get a chance to experience what is so great about the game itself.
Right.
And Casey was a tremendous part of that. When did he leave to go to New York and manage the Mets?
He managed the Mets the first year of their existence, 1962, 63, 64, and 65. And that's when he had Marvelous Marv Throneberry and all these guys. And, they were just horrible. I mean, the guys, it was just he went. Now, think about this. With the Yankees, he was there 12 years. He won 10 pennants. Yeah. In 12 years, and he's the only manager, and thank God I'll never see this in my lifetime. He's the only manager that's ever won 5 straight world championships. 1949, 1950, 51, 52, 53, he won the world title. And he, so that's a record and he and Joe McCarthy are tied for 7 World Series winning. And they're the all-time most World Series won.
Now, there's a lot of champagne that spilled during that 5-year run that he had. I'm sure he's got some great stories about either Whitey or Mickey or Billy or Elston or any of those guys. Yogi, I'm sure. Did you listen very carefully when he would share?
One of the reasons I was divorced, my wife thought I was out messing around. I'd go out and have dinner with Casey and say, come in and have a nightcap.
Yeah.
So who's going to not go in and have a nightcap with Casey Stengel?
And next thing, it's 3 a.m, isn't it?
Exactly. We would talk baseball, and he would tell me about, getting paid in gold in Cuba when they played in Cuba. He would tell me about, batting against Ruth. He would tell me about, I learned the history of baseball, because that's all Casey. I used to tell Casey one day. I told him, I said, Casey, he used to like to drink Jack Daniels in that velvet bag. I said, Casey, I'm going to tell you one thing. All I know is one thing. If there's not baseball wherever the hell you're going, you're going to be screwed, when we pass on. He laughed. But anyway, the guy just loved the game. He just loved the game.
Yeah, it was such an indelible mark with him. But now you mentioned the good times, right? The 5 championships in a row, and then oops, I go to New York and I manage the Mets. I know he's had some great yogiism, so to speak, some fun things.
You know what Casey always told me, Harper? He always told me that they asked him who his greatest player was. He said Yogi Berra. He never said DiMaggio. He never said Mantle. He said Yogi Berra. Now let me just tell you this. Now people don't talk about this. I think he is the greatest catcher of all time, not Johnny Bench. It's that people don't remember. Yogi Berra won 3 MVPs. He was in the top 5 voting 7 times.
Yeah.
Yogi Berra only struck out like 400 times in his career and had a 285 lifetime batting average. Yogi Berra had 71 hits in World Series games. 71. Yogi Berra would have won a lot more Gold Gloves, but they didn't have them in before 1957. You follow me? So there's so many things. Yogi, he used to call him my assistant manager. He said, you know what he'd say to me? They say he reads comic books. He played like a goddamn genius for me. You know how many times I heard him say that?
Yeah.
Over, and sorry to swear, but that's what he said. He said, they say he read comics books, and Yogi was a character. His wife, Carmen, one day, he says, where are you going? She says, I'm going to go see Dr. Zhivago. He says, what the hell's wrong with you now? But I mean, there's so many funny stories about Yogi Berra, and they were true. But one of the sweetest, nice, and you talk about Yogi Berra knew where all the bodies were buried. Yeah. Believe me. He was at the Copacabana deal. He was at all these things. Never said a word. He was like a wooden Indian, keeping his mouth shut. Never said a word. That's how he was. He wasn't educated like you guys, college, but he was very street savvy.
Absolutely, he had a doctorate in street smarts, and I think the hey, when you come to the fork in the road, take it. There's some genius behind some of that.
Absolutely.
The baseball is 90% mental, the other half is physical.
Well, how about they had a pizza and they said, do you want us to cut it in 4s or 8s? And he said, I'm starving, cut it in 8s.
There was a reason behind when you come to the fork in the road. There was a street that he lived off from the stadium. To get to his house, you had to either make a left or a right turn. Either one would work, and it would eventually get you back on the road to go to his house. So that's where he came up with that. There's a logic and a method to the madness. But and here's another thing about Yogi that impresses me. He's probably half an inch bigger than a postage stamp.
You're right.
Tiny little guy.
Barely 5'8".
It's unbelievable how little he was.
In a bar, nobody would believe this guy's a Hall of Fame baseball player.
Yeah. Yeah, he's just bigger than the postage stamp, but my God. And Bob, you would also recognize this too. Is it fair for me to say that he knew how to strike or strike out batters that anyone on the staff would need that assistance? He was a scouting report guy. He knew, hey, throw 100%. This low and away. We're going to get a ground out. We'll get out of the inning.
Yep, 100%.
Gosh. Yeah, so that's why Casey called him his assistant manager, right?
Yeah, he was and plus, besides that, as a person, he's one of the sweetest guys you'd ever want to meet.
Yeah. But his wife was fooling around with Dr. Zhivago.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that one. That's fantastic. So the Mets, the Miracle Mets, had nothing to do with Casey, even though he he was there on day one.
He was the vice president at that time.
But I understand. I'm just saying from a managerial standpoint, He goes from the field upstairs and oh my God, is it Kuzman and Gullett and Seaver, some kid that can't even make it in the World Series lineup named Nolan Ryan. I mean, goodness gracious, what a lineup.
100%. Tommy Agee, it was amazing. They had a great team. We're on Sabota.
Yeah, so he's in there. Now, when did you start working for Casey?
1965.
Okay, so you were actually gainfully employed for him. Can you kind of break down what it was that you were doing because working for somebody, I don't know what that means.
I would shield whenever people would call him or, for appearances or commercials, I would talk to the people. I was this guy that talked to him. I would go through all of his mail every day, and he would get 300 or 400 fan letters every week for autographs. I'd separate the fan letters from the regular mail. I took him everywhere. I escorted him to, every time we went to a ball game, I was with Casey. We had he was the president of Valley National Bank, and they had tickets right behind home plate. And then we'd sit up in 215 in the loge level with Rod Dato, and Cary Grant sat right next to us. Cary loved Casey.
Yeah.
And we just had a great time, but I would escort him everywhere he went. I was kind of like an all-around guy. I did anything for him.
Managerial stuff, financial.
Yes, a lot of times I would have to get the checks. He'd have to sign some. See, Edna got Alzheimer's. His wife Edna, who was married to the last 3 or 4 years. So Casey never had written a check in his life. So I had to go through everything and sort out everything and have him sign the checks.
So financial advisor. Fair to say you were the secretary. You answered the phone. Yep. You were the wedding planner. You did everything for him. I have to imagine, Bob, that being able to be all-encompassing meant that there was a level of trust that he had in you that was unsurpassed by anyone else.
And what I want to say is, later in my life, after he passed away, I represented 40 major league players, and that 10 years with Casey, believe me, gave me credibility. With I represented Phil Niekro, Joe Niekro, Sam McDowell, Warren Spahn, Tony Oliva, Rod Carew, on and on and on and on and on. Mike Lum. I mean, just player after player after Darrell Evans. Wow. And the 10 years with Casey, remember, I had no college, but that was what gave me the credibility to start a company, Pro Sports Enterprises, with Bob DeLauer, who's a former Ram football player, and he played at SC for Howard Jones. And he was, he kicked the first field goal in the history of the LA Rams in the Coliseum in 1946 to beat the Washington Redskins. Anyway, he was my business partner, and we had all these ball players under contract, and we'd get them commercials, speaking engagements. I got Rod Carew a Topa. He got a free Mercedes-Benz to do Topa auto leasing down in Culver City, and it was in the paper every day. Rod Carew's longest drive, a Topa auto lease car, and it was on billboards and stuff. So that's the kind of stuff I did.
Well, Bob, I'm surprised that Major League Baseball, and this would have been Bowie Kuhn back in those days, wouldn't kick you out because you didn't have the licensing, you didn't have the certification, you're an agent, you're a manager, you're a financial advisor, you're all of that boiled into one. Today, you couldn't do that without having degrees and all the other.
I'm really not aware of that. I have all the contracts still here. I'd have them signed contracts. I'd get 25% of what I got. Some guys 20 on other guys. And, in those days, they'd come down. We have a few cocktails. I had an office in the Clothing Mart, 110 East 9th Street, downtown LA. And we had a bar in my office. And it was right across on 496B from the women's restroom. So all the good-looking models from the Fashion Mart would come to use the restroom. We'd invite them in for a drink. So all the players, as soon as they'd come to LA, whether at the Sheraton or the Biltmore, they'd come over to the Mart. So it was, you wonder why am I representing ball players working out of the Clothing Mart? They loved it over there. There's a place called Dale's in the Mart. They'd go down and have lunch and have a few cocktails. It was a fun place.
Yeah, and even the straight player that's not, look, I'm not going to cheat on my wife, but the girl that would come in and say, oh, here's a scarf you can bring back for your wife. And now, did you have Camel filterless, or did you go Marlboro Reds at the bar? Because everybody
smoked everything different. Thank God when I quit drinking, I quit smoking. I was smoking all the time.
Yeah.
But Sam McDowell, who's my sponsor today in Alcoholics Anonymous, I talked to him yesterday. He's in Claremont, Florida. He had the greatest line ever. A reporter he's like, you know how many lives he saved in baseball, Sam McDowell? I mean, MLB gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award for all the work. He was with the Toronto Blue Jays, won his 2 World Series rings there. He was with the Texas Rangers. He helped George Bush. He helped all these guys get sober. I mean, the guys had an amazing career. But anyway, he said to Sports Illustrated, a guy, he said, what's the hardest part of being in the big leagues? This is back in the 60s. He said, trying to explain to your wife why she has to get a penicillin shot for your arthritis.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Interesting, different days, weren't they?
They were completely different days then. And today these guys are family guys. They're probably way better people than they were back then. But I mean, they're like the Dodger team. They're wholesome guys. Most of them are happily married, and they just hang out with each other. They go to their kids' birthday parties and everything. Totally different deal.
Yeah.
No drinkers, no smokers.
We did a special on one of the old Ram players way back when, and I looked at the schedule from, I think it was 1958. And you'll have to forgive me about this because I know it applies to baseball, but this is really a football analogy. The Rams would have a home game, and then they would go to Detroit and Chicago, and then they would go to New York, and then they come back. They were on the road for 3 straight weeks. They would take a train and go from one city to the other, and they probably wouldn't get back to LA for Wednesday, but they were together and they did everything. They were their 100%. Own family unit. They took care of each other. They looked out after each other. They would get drunk together, or they would be the very best thing to be. That applies to baseball too.
After the game, Ryan, they all go their separate ways. Back then, they played cards together. They hung out together. Warren Spahn and Lou Burdett roomed together for years. And Warren Spahn would tell me, I just let Lou order my breakfast because he knew what I wanted. In other words, they were together. They would drink together. Yes. They would room together. They're with each other way more than their families. So the players back then, they all loved each other. They kidded each other. They joked around. They had fun. I mean, I remember that Eddie Sadowski was a catcher, and he had a 150 batting average. And I remember Art Fowler in the locker room holding up the Sunday LA Times where they had all the batting averages. Every Sunday they'd have the whole major league batting averages. And he said, "Look, guys, look." They called him Sato. Sato's the strongest man in the league. Look, he's holding up the whole league because he was on the bottom of the batting averages.
Yeah. Well, they would finish each other's sentences. That's how familiar they were with one another.
And if they weren't kidding you, Ryan, if they weren't screwing around with you, they didn't like you. Do you
That's
understand?
Right.
In other words, if they were, the more they ripped you, the more they liked you. Do you understand?
Yeah. And you had to be able to take it at first.
Absolutely.
And then you learn that's the way they tell you that they like you is how much they tell you they don't like you and how worthless and weak you are. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. There he is right there.
There's my guy.
Well, 69, the Mets win it all.
Wow. How did you come up with that? That's Eddie, all right.
Yeah. Well, it's Google. It's being smarter. Logan knows what he's doing. You work kind of exclusively with Casey, but you mentioned the business, and now you're managing other players. Can I ask? Because I think the Kirk Flood situation really changed that. Tell me how important it was for you to read every page of the contract to make sure that the players were getting exactly what they should be getting and not getting, I won't say screwed over, but being taken advantage over. A league that the disparity was still pretty. There was a great chasm between players and owners still back in that day.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of people, Ryan, that think you mentioned Kurt Flood should be in the Hall of Fame. They put Marvin Miller in the Hall of Fame. And Kurt Flood, I'm telling you, he sacrificed his whole career. He was beautiful. I don't know if you know this, Steve Travers, but Bo Belinsky was best friends with Kurt Flood. They were best friends. And he became an artist later in life. He really became one heck of an artist and a great guy. And I just think what he did just revolutionized baseball. And every guy that plays Major League Baseball now should thank Jackie Robinson and Kurt Flood, because those two people really. I'm going to tell you a story about. Do I have time to tell you a story that Babe Herman told me?
Please do.
Okay, I'm sitting at Babe Herman's house one day. This is an amazing, amazing story. And I said, "Babe, you hit 393 for the Dodgers in 1930. He's the all-time batting average for the history of the Dodgers, Babe Herman." And I said, "You had a 324 lifetime batting average." I said, "Babe, who was the best left-hander and right-hander you ever faced?" And he said, "Bobby, the best left-hander I ever faced was Wild Bill Hallahan, who pitched for the St. Louis Cardinals." And he said, for whatever reason, I couldn't get him out. Now I thought he was going to tell me Carl Hubble or some Hall of Famer. Yeah. And I said, well, who was the best right-hander? I thought he'd say Walter Johnson or Grover Cleveland Alexander. Or he said, the best right-hander I ever faced, Bobby, was Chet Brewer. I said, Chet Brewer? Chet Brewer, I knew. He handled Doc Ellis and Don Wilson and Eddie Murray and all these players. He was a scout for the Pirates, a black guy who played for the Kansas City Monarchs. And I said, wait a minute, how would you have ever faced Chet Brewer? He was a blue-eyed black guy, great guy. I said, how would you have ever faced Chet Brewer? He said to me, Bobby, in those years, we barnstormed. And he said, I faced Chet Brewer 3 different times, 12 at-bats, and never got a foul ball. And you know what that told me? In my mind, I went, wait a minute. There were 2 leagues back then. You had the Negro leagues and you had the Caucasian leagues. Because if Chet Brewer was the best pitcher you ever faced and you played 14 years in the big leagues, he didn't say Satchel Paige. You said Chet Brewer. I said, I don't need to hear anymore. And I said that on Al Downing's radio show one time. And he said, I can't believe a white guy said that, Bobby. And I said, it's true, though. Think about it. I mean, there were so many greats. Roy Campanella told me that Josh Gibson was the best player he ever saw.
Yeah.
Josh Gibson, a catcher for the Pittsburgh Crawfords that died at 32 of alcoholism, but he was like Babe Ruth as a catcher and a great defensive catcher. So This is Roy Campanella told me that.
Yeah.
He didn't say Willie Mays. He said Josh Gibson's the best player I ever saw.
Before he died, anytime Buck O'Neill opened his mouth, I wanted to hear what he had to say. You know what I mean? Because the stories that he was involved with and the separation and all that, completely. So what was the name of the league that you mentioned just a moment ago?
Not
the Negro League and the
I said there should have been the Caucasian leagues and the Negro leagues.
Please forgive me. Yes, I understand that. I'm just saying they were barnstorming. Excuse me. That's what you mentioned.
Yeah,
you mentioned
in the off season they would barnstorm.
They'd make a couple of bucks and play together and just my team and your team and all white, all black, right? You just guys playing baseball with one another.
That's exactly correct.
Wow, and that went the way of the dodo as well, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Well, and again, dealing probably until the mid '70s, baseball players. Football players, I guess if you were a hockey player or in the NBA, you had a moonlighting gig that you did during the off season, selling cars, working at the hardware shop. Yeah, completely different era.
We used to laugh. Johnny Podres, who was the MVP of the 1955 World Series and won the first World Series for the Brooklyn Dodgers, used to sell vacuum cleaners door to door. Now, can you imagine? Yeah. Your doorbell rings and you open the door and there's Johnny Podres asking to buy a vacuum cleaner.
Would you like to buy this electrolyte? Here, remember the episode of I Love Lucy where she begins by throwing this big wad of dirt on somebody's carpet and she couldn't get it up and oops, that's one of those moments. I hope Johnny didn't have to deal with that too much. But agency is the next thing, right? And I want to work with you a little bit, at least have some conversation about, representing players, growing that type of a business in a time where the reason I brought it up is I think there were some, absolute necessities. Hey, if he wins the MVP of the league, hey, if you guys go to the World Series or if you win the pennant, let's pay some bonuses out to these guys and let's make sure that it gets distributed as well as it can be for my guys, right? That you're now become a marketer as well. Right.
No, it's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the old days, they were really kind of cheap. Somebody was just telling me yesterday, Jim Hughes, played for the Minnesota Twins and was the vice president of Rawlings Sporting Goods. He told me yesterday that the Dodger equipment guys, now listen to this, the equipment guys got a $500,000 share each last year for the World Series. 500,000.
Yeah. Friend of mine, Kelly McGregor, I went to, I attended college with him. When he was done, played about 3 years in the league, went back and got his master's, and then worked for Frank Broyles at the University of Arkansas for 4 years before he got into baseball. The McMorris, the Coors, and the Monforts were a part of the organization that brought the Rockies to professional baseball to the Denver area with the Rockies. And Kelly was the president of the organization for 17 years. The year that they went to the World Series in 2004, they swept, I think, the Cardinals. They swept the Astros, I think, and then they were swept by the Red Sox. They didn't get a full share. It cost Kelly $40,000 for each ring that they got because of the way that Major League Baseball works. But he wanted everybody in the organization to get it. The guy that took out the trash, the woman who answered the phone, everybody. So it was an expensive deal. The Dodgers series goes 6 games. 500,000 would have been the share, and the players vote on that. Just in $500,000 just for doing your job.
Yeah.
Nice tip, right? Nice way to make a living. Casey never got any of that with the 5 World Series in a row. I bet you got a $5,000 bonus if that.
Well, Casey had an equipment guy named Pete Sheehy that he loved, and Pete Sheehy was there when Babe Ruth was there in Yankee Stadium.
Oh my gosh!
And he worked all the way through Billy Martin. He was a great guy, Pete Sheehy.
Wow. I'm sure the stories that he would tell.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Goodness gracious, that's a historical thing. For you next, Bob, after the agency. We want to talk about boxing, but before we do, just anything else in baseball that you go, you know what, this is what's great about the game. Hey, this is something that has been a challenge for many, many years, and baseball needs to figure this out. Any observations that you have in terms of the way that you grew up?
What I would say about baseball is it survived, even though the changes, a lot of them I don't like, a lot of the stuff I don't like, it still survives. And what I've always said about baseball, which to me makes it baseball is Steve Travers talking to his grandson about watching Rod Carew play. It's Casey talking to me about watching Babe Ruth play. It's my dad talking to me about watching Babe Herman play. It's me talking to my grandkids about seeing Ted Williams play. It's what it is. It's fathers and sons and grandparents, and it goes down. And as you expressed earlier, the first time you went to Dodger Stadium, the smell of the hot dogs, the green grass, the thing, it's a whole connection of America. And to me, it's one of the few things when you see what's going on in the outside world today, it makes me want to vomit. Baseball is still pure, relatively pure and clean. And it's the American game even today. And that's why, if it wasn't for, I've always said, if it wasn't for baseball, I wouldn't be alive. So baseball to me is almost like a religion because it really saved my life, and how about Dean Chance, who was my best friend, hired me. He became in boxing after he won the Cy Young in 1964. Now listen to this. 64, he had 11 shutouts. And he pitched 3 other games, 9 innings or more, and didn't get a win of a shutout. And I was there in Dodger Stadium when he shut out the Yankees for 14 innings and didn't get a decision. So he would have had 14 shutouts. He led the league in the ERA with a 164. It was and Mickey Mantle was scared to death of Dean Chance. People, you know what Dean Chance? I'm going to tell you what he told me about Tony Oliva, who I was so happy to see him get in the Hall of Fame finally about 5 years ago. They would ask Dean Chance, who was the best batter you ever faced? And he said, I would rather face Mickey Mantle, Carl Yastrzemski, Frank Howard, Al Kaline than I would Tony Oliva. And Tony Oliva never got, because he played in Minnesota.
Yeah.
He won 3 batting titles, his first year and second year batting titles, and he won a batting title in 73 with 337 on one leg. He had all these knee surgeries. He never got a bunt single. He never ran out an infield single like Carew got a bunch of bunts and run out, So the guy was a tremendous hitter. He was a natural hitter. He could hit doubles, triples, home runs. And I was so happy because Dean was talking to Gene Michael about getting him in the Hall of Fame, and he finally got in about 4 years ago or 5 years ago. And I said to Tony, Tony, is it any different being in the Hall of Fame? And I always kid him. I said, Tony, when I met you, spoke 1 word of English. This is 2025. You speak 2 words. I said, is it any different? And he goes, no, I'm not different, but people treat me different.
Hey, that was it 64 or maybe 67. When did the Twins end up going to the World Series? They played the Dodgers.
65. They lost to the Dodgers in the 65 World Series.
And just like today, when you deal with Kansas City or Pittsburgh, they couldn't keep their star. Montreal, they couldn't keep their stars. They just didn't have the market.
They had a great team though. They had Killebrew, they had Rich
Yes.
Rollins. Rich Rollins just passed away a couple of weeks ago, but the third baseman, they had Zoyo Versalles, the MVP at shortstop. They had
Was
Don
Orlando
Mitchell at first base.
Cepeda in that organization too at that time?
He was not. He was with the Giants and the Braves.
Forgive me. Okay, so I got one wrong. That won't be the only time, but
I'm impressed with your baseball knowledge, Ron.
Well,
I thought you were an NFL
guy. Go back to Dean for just a second. You said he had 14 shutouts if you include the Yankee.
He had 11 shutouts and he had 3 others. That's what I'm saying. These guys today, they pitch 4 innings and they make a big deal. Oh, the guy went 4 innings. Now, Warren Spahn was my client. Now, I want you to listen to this. Casey sent Spahn. Spahn pitched for Casey when he was with the Boston Bees. Casey asked him to throw at a guy. He didn't. So Casey sent him to Hartford and said he was gutless. Now, he goes and fights the Battle of the Bulge, won the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and some other honors in that famous bridge thing he was involved in. Came back. He hadn't won a game. He's 25 years old. He hadn't won a game. He won 363 games. He won 20 games in 13 different years. He pitched 2 no-hitters after the age of 40. You know what Spahn used to tell me? The art of pitching is keeping the hitter off balance.
Yeah.
He said, I would only throw my hardest 3 or 4 times a game. And that's why you have all these Tommy Johns and all this stuff. Spahn, look what he did. I mean, and they say Koufax won 160 games. Spahn is the greatest pitcher. I was telling Steve yesterday that I've seen in my lifetime. The greatest, and I happen to know him. He's from Hartshorn, Oklahoma, one of the nicest, most fun guys you ever want to be around. But just an amazing pitcher. And he did it in Milwaukee, and he didn't get a lot of credit. But look, if you ever get bored, just Google his record. Google Warren Spahn. You'll see.
I will gladly go that route with you. You lose at least a month at the beginning of the year and maybe a month at the end of the year with weather issues that you're lucky to get the ball, over the plate without the snow hitting it there in Milwaukee at that time. Oh my gosh. Okay, so real quick, the Dodgers 64. I don't know if they went to the World Series. How come we don't know about this? The 11 shutout record. We know of Drysdale's prior record that Hershiser broke for scoreless innings in the 50s, but 11 shutouts? Are you kidding?
And the Angels were lousy. He won at the All-Star break. He had 5 wins, and he ended up going 20-9. And he should have won 35 games. I mean, they were horrible.
Yeah,
but, he was just an amazing pitcher in his prime. Bill Rigney, who managed the Angels and the Giants, said the best pitcher he ever saw was Dean Chance. But you got to remember the Angels were like the bridesmaids in L.A. Nobody paid attention to them.
They couldn't. Ken McMullen, I remember him being there. Tanana and Ryan and 2 Days of Crying. That was the best battle cry that the Angels ever came up with during the first 20 years of their organization.
That's right.
But
Tanana, I'll give Tanana credit. When he lost his fastball, boy, he lasted for years just throwing junk, and he was terrific.
Yep. A la Clayton Kershaw, what he's doing right now.
Yeah.
Clayton can't, he's throwing 91. That's amazing. The love of the game, the great portion of the game that you were a part of, the business of the game, baseball been very good to you, right, Bob?
Oh, absolutely. Back it's changed so much. We had a pitching coach named Marv Grissom. You know what his job was? After every batting practice, he would count the baseballs, Joe Cronin American League balls. He would count them, and he would write down how many were in the leather bag, and he would take milk and a towel and wipe the grass off the balls. Today, they throw them in the stands. They give them away. It's complete. They used to be, if a player gave a ball to a fan, they would fine him Okay. I remember Eli Gerba, a pitcher. This is, I'm 17. You don't think I wised up fast as a kid? He says, Bobby, can you sneak me out a ball and have the team sign it and get it for me? I said, sure, Eli. So I took out an American League ball, Joe Cronin, had the whole team sign it. I give it to Eli. I said, Eli, who's this for? It's for my girlfriend's son. And I go, oh, that's nice, Eli. And you know what he says to me? Yeah, Bobby, you pet the calf to milk the cow. And I'm like, oh, my God. But anyway.
Oh, again, stuff that you can't, you just can't say that, but you can, and it's hilarious. I love it. Oh my goodness. Oh gosh.
I've tried to keep away from all profanity.
Yeah,
if
I
you're
know.
talking about the players from that era, it's very hard.
Well, yeah, and there's something like there's a couple of stories that I have that even at my grave, I can't tell them. It's just goofy things, but men being men, outside of the Battle of the Bulge. My gosh, I'd forgotten that Warren was a vet and a part of that. What an amazing thing! How did boxing become a part of your life?
Well, I always liked boxing. I knew Muhammad Ali from a young age, and I would go down to his house in Fremont Place, and I was at his 39th birthday party as a guest. But I was go down to the Hoover gym on Chagrew's gym on 78th and Hoover. I'd go to the Main Street gym back in the day. But anyway, Dean Chance loved boxing, and he became the president of the International Boxing Association, and he managed fighters. And he hired me as the vice president. So I was with the vice president of the International Boxing Association for 20 years. And then I managed Hall of Fame fighter Johnny Tapia, who they're making a movie on him as we speak. And there's been books written on him, and there's documentaries done on him. And this kid, I'm going to tell you about this kid. He's from Albuquerque, New Mexico. His mother was stabbed 29 times, raped and murdered when he was 7 years old. His father was murdered before he was born. He grew up as a pit bull. They put him in cockfights. These drug addicts, heroin addicts raised him, and they make him steal syringes for and he would grow up. They'd put him in a fight, and if he lost the fight, they'd lock him in a closet for 24 hours and pour hot coffee on him. So this is how he grew up, okay? So then he got involved in gangs and everything. This kid, if I'd raised him in Malibu, California, he could have been a Major League Baseball player. He was the best basketball player. He was in prison. He'd had one of the sweetest, nicest, most loving. I was with him for 12 years. It was one of the most rewarding things I ever did. We won 5 world championships together. He was a first ballot in the International Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota, New York. He is in 7 or 8 Hall of Fames. I've inducted him in a couple. Anyway, posthumously, he died in 2012. But this kid, what I saw him overcome and how I saw him handle his success and the kind of a human being he was, he was unbelievable. How about this? All the rock stars I've ever worked with, he was married to Teresa, who saved his life, okay? He was so respectful of women. So there he is. That's Teresa right there. Very good. Anyway, he was so respectful of women that if you're sitting at a table with your wife and somebody said a bad word, he'd say to him, look, you're in the presence of a woman. Do you see that? And he was so polite, pulling out chairs. He was just, because of what happened to his mother, he was one of the few rock star athletes. I would be with him and women would pull out their breasts and want him to autograph them. I saw he never, may God strike me dead, that I know of, ever went out, and he had 5 million opportunities. He was a rock star. Especially the Hispanics loved him and everything. Yep. And he was so loyal to his wife. The only thing he couldn't do is he couldn't stay sober because the trauma of his childhood. We'd go to Big Bear and train for 6 weeks in the altitude, and he was perfect. But when he won all the time. I mean, his record in world title fights, he won 18, lost 1, and tied 1. And the one loss was a controversial decision to Paulie Ayala. But I mean, he was just an amazing kid. You know, I got more out of working with him. He taught me things. I watched how he behaved. And people used to say, oh, you made Johnny, look what he learned from you. And I used to say, no, I learned from him.
Right.
I learned a lot of things from him. And he's like the son I never had, you know. He died in 2012. and at 45 years old. But I think about him every day. He's just a beautiful human being, and wherever he's at, that's where I want to go.
Yeah. Well, as long as they have baseball there too with Casey, we need to have that a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Is it fair to say, with the trauma you mentioned and the horrible experiences, that he absolutely needed someone he could trust, and you ended up being,
100%.
and you ended up being that guy, and it just the connection between right place at the right time. And
well, at the time, I was managing Mickey Rooney, the actor, and that's how I met Johnny. We were up in Vegas, and we started talking, and then he kept calling me, and then he asked me to work with him, and then I'm the one that told him to have Teresa manage him because she knows him better than anybody. And I had Mickey Rooney walk him in the ring on HBO a couple times.
Really?
At the ring walk. Mickey Rooney loved Johnny because he was in some fight movies, Killer McCoy and Requiem of a Heavyweight with Anthony Quinn. He was in that movie. But the bottom line is he loved Johnny. He loved boxing. And he was just a beautiful, Johnny, we were on an airplane one time. You don't think I've thought about this since he passed? We were at Madison Square Garden. We're coming back, and I'm sleeping on the aisle, He called me Big Bopper. He taps me on the shoulder, and he says, "Bopper, am I a bad guy?" And I was half asleep. And I looked at him. This is a shot from God. I looked at him, and I said, "No, Johnny, you're not a bad guy. You're a good guy. You're just a product of your environment, like all of us. All of us. We're a product of our environment." And he smiled, and he said, "Thanks, Bopper," and went back to sleep. Now, you know how many times I've thought about that since he died? But anyway.
That's the end of Saving Private Ryan when he says to his wife, "Tell me I was a good man."
Wow.
Tough line, Wow. Well, you mentioned Mickey Rooney and all that. So you've got acting, you've got boxing, you've got baseball players. You're able to help represent all of that. One is get me a gig. One is get me paid. One is don't steal all my money. Right? There's a commonality between all of it, but you're able to put all these deals together. You're a puppeteer pulling strings and just making everybody's life a little bit better.
Well, the
right?
key thing, everybody needs somebody that they trust, and I've always, if somebody's on my A list, I'll die for them, and that's the way I've always been. I've just been loyal to people. I know guys from all 5 families in New York, and they're all good guys. I'm telling you, they're just a product of their environments, but some of them are really, really nice people. And, it's just, we're all, we come into this world, and we're all presented different circumstances. And that's what I've learned. We just try to get through it the best we can, with what we're dealt with,
Right. Well, the boxing world is almost one that, me being an outsider, I look at it and I go, you can't trust anyone in it because it's just.
Why do you think they've always called boxing the red light district of sports? It's been run by, Blink. I'm going to tell you a Mike Tyson story. Now, you talk about a great story. Now, here's another guy that everybody thinks is a thug, okay? Let me tell you the story. There was a fighter, a lightweight Hall of Fame fighter named Ike Williams, who Eddie Futch told me was the greatest lightweight he ever saw. He died. He was broke at the end because Blinky Palermo and Frankie Carbo managed him and stole all his money. They were wise guys from New York. Okay. He lived in a 1-bedroom apartment down on Franklin Street in Hollywood at the end. And he was a Burns detective where you put a cop uniform on. And he didn't have any money. And he'd call me up at the end of every month and say, "Bobby, can you buy me a sandwich? I'm broke." I would get him gigs where he'd get $500 to sign 100 photos. And I'd do that to him every week. Some guy in Florida would send me the money and the photos. I'd take him down and give him money. Anyway, so I'd say, "Sure, Ike." So one day he calls me up. He says, "Bobby, I'm hungry. Can you buy me a sandwich?" There he is. God, you guys are great. "Can you buy me a sandwich?" And I said, "Ike, I got a special treat for you. We're going to the Monday night fights at the Forum." He goes, "Oh, great." So I took him down to the waffle and chicken place in Hollywood. We went there. Then we went to the Monday night fights at the Forum. And I said, "Okay, Ike, I'm going to go get the tickets. I'm going to drop you off and meet me right outside the Forum Club. Wait outside the Forum Club, and I'll come in with the tickets." 20 minutes go by. I walk in. He says, "Bobby, you're always driving me around, buying me lunches." I want you to have this. He hands me $100 bill. I said, Ike, I thought you were broke. Bobby, here, take this. I said, where'd you get $100? He said, Mike Tyson and his entourage came in. And I went up to him. I said, Mike, I need a job. Because Customato made him look at boxing films of the history of boxing. Mike said, you're Ike Williams. He recognized him.
Wow.
And Ike said, I said, what do you do then, Ike? He said, he called me over in the corner and he gave me $2,500 cash.
Wow.
I said, where's the other $2,400? It's in my sock. Okay. So now think about this. I had never met, I know Mike Tyson. I'd never met him before that. This
Sure.
is right when he was first world champion. And I thought to myself, I know people that live in Malibu in a $200 million house that wouldn't have given Ike Williams a stick of gum.
Not a penny, right?
And I'm going, what? So I became a Mike Tyson fan from that day forward. And listen to this, one day Tyson would train in Johnny Tapia's garage in Vegas, because he wanted to stay away from the Golden Gloves gym where all the reporters were. And one day he's there with Shelley Finkel, his manager, and some other people, and some reporters were there. And I said, Mike, I just want to tell you, Ike Williams is one of my dearest friends. And before I could say anything, he gave me a big grin with that gold tooth.
Yep.
He didn't want me to say anything nice about him. You get it?
Yep.
In other words, it might ruin his reputation as
just between you and me. Keep it just between you and me. Yep.
Yep. Absolutely right.
I think he valued the fact that you knew it, but he also wanted to, let's let not anybody else know about it.
100% correct.
Wow, that is so cool. Tell me about the history of the Olympic and what that meant to Los Angeles boxing.
Oh, I knew.
Is it Jimmy Lane and Judo Gene LeBel that also did the wrestling as well?
He was inducted in the Hall of Fame with me in 2023. I went in the West Coast Boxing Hall of Fame. Gene LeBel was in with me. Barry Gordy, who fought, went in with me at 93 years old. He was up on the stage dancing and everything. At 93, George Foreman was there just before he passed. He was there. Manny Pacquiao, Sugar Ray Robinson went in posthumously. It was a great. The announcer, what's his name? The guy was on HBO for years.
Buffer or
Larry Merchant.
Oh, Larry. Okay, I thought you were thinking of Jim.
Anyway, it was a great event, and Gene LeBel's mother was Eileen Eaton, who owned the Olympic Auditorium, and she's the first woman to be inducted in the Boxing Hall of Fame. Gene LeBel's mother, and Judo Gene LeBel was he was a good friend of Dean Chance. Was one of the sweetest. He was a stuntman in hundreds and thousands of movies. He's worked with John Wayne, worked with everybody in Hollywood, and he was a wrestler back in the 50s when they had, Lou Thez and all these people had wrestled at the Olympic Auditorium.
Yep.
He was there, and one of the nicest, sweetest guys ever. And unfortunately, he passed away 3 weeks or 4 weeks before his induction. That was May of 2023 or March of 2023.
Bob, that's 2 guys that you've mentioned that have died just prior to their induction into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, Kenny Buchanan was a Scottish fighter. He had dementia and he couldn't come from Scotland, and he was inducted.
Okay, wow. Well, him and Goosen, you mentioned him a little bit earlier. Hey, can I go back to baseball with you for a second? Yeah. Pete Rose, tell me, yes or no?
One of my dearest friends in the world, Pete. One of my best friends for years. And I've got a thing there. I think I sent it to. I had mononucleosis. Now, this will tell you all you need to know about Pete. I had mononucleosis when I was like 18, and I was helping. He knew me from the visiting side. I get a thing in the mail one day, and it was a get well card. I don't know if I sent that to Steven or not. It's a get well. I got it right here. I could show it to you. It's a get well card from Pete Rose, wishing me to get well. Now, what does that tell you about Pete Rose? Do you want me to show it to you on the screen here?
Yeah, if you'd like to. Yeah, absolutely. That's a piece of baseball memorabilia. We're looking in it's a shame you don't have any pictures with celebrities and stars and autographs.
I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it?
Hold it there for a second. Yeah. Oh, how about that? Look at that.
Wait, can you read it?
We can now. Bobby, get well. Best wishes always from your pal, Pete Rose. How about that?
I found this when I was cleaning up my stuff. I'm looking for Pete here. Here's a picture of us when we were both before my hair turned white.
Oh, how about that? Wow. And again, Pete's not a big guy. We mentioned Yogi Berra a little bit.
Let me just tell you this: one of the sweetest, nicest guys. He had a gambling problem. But he never cheated in baseball. He loved baseball. He was another great ambassador. I never saw him refuse an autograph. I never ever saw him big league anybody. I never saw him act like a jerk. We were talking about great ambassadors for baseball. Forget the gambling. He was truly. He was like Casey. He loved the game of baseball. He loved it. He would be out there. He never drank. He never smoked. He would be out there. Al Ferrara roomed with him in '71 with the Reds, and he said Al would be out drinking, and he said Pete would be at the ballpark at 1 o'clock getting the bat boys out to play pepper because he was just loved baseball, And that record, I used to tell Pete, I said, Pete, he was upset he wasn't in the Hall of Fame. I said, Pete, you don't need the Hall of Fame. Why would you, if you have more hits than anybody in the history of baseball, why would you need the Hall of Fame? They need you to validate they're the Hall of Fame. Are you kidding me? Now they're talking about putting him in posthumously? That's all BS. Pete Rose, if they couldn't put him in and that commissioner, all you would have had to do is make one phone call, but he's a politically correct idiot.
Yeah.
I think he's the worst commissioner we've ever had. That's why they boo him every time he's making a public appearance. He could have made one phone call to Cooperstown and said, hey, this is the MLB commissioner. We need to get Pete in the Hall of Fame. They didn't. And, but the truth is, why would he need to be in the Hall of Fame? Why? It's like saying, does Ty Cobb need to be in the Hall of Fame? Does Babe Ruth need to be in the Hall of Fame? If you got 4,256 hits, why would you need to be in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I've never wanted to call it the Hall of Fame. I'm sorry, it's not called the Hall of Stats, although Pete does have the stats. And if you don't mind me saying so, the writers have a memory that makes an elephant's memory look like it's quicker than a New York minute. Most
of the writers today have never had a jockstrap on and never saw Pete Rose play. Most of them,
Most of them today,
half these guys writing about. Steve Travers is a writer, but he played baseball.
Yeah,
he's an athlete. Okay, but a lot of these writers don't know anything about playing the game other than what they read.
And you can have an opinion. You're entitled to it, and you don't have to agree with mine, and I don't have to agree with you. You know what I mean? But the controversy over that, I thought would be resolved. I'll be very brief with this. I thought one of the greatest disservices ever that the NFL Hall of Fame did is to add Ken Stabler after he died. What
Absolutely.
The heck?
The snake should have been in the Hall of Fame 20 years ago.
If he's good enough to be in it, why wouldn't you allow him and his family and everybody that loved?
They did it to Leo DeRocher. They did it to Ron Santo after he passed away. They did it to Leo DeRocher after he passed. There's a whole list of them. And to me, if Scott Rowland is in the Hall of Fame and Pete Rose is not, it's not. It's just it's a political. Good thing, because come on, there's so many guys that Maury Wills is not in the Hall of Fame and Harold Baines is. Come on. Yeah. I mean, it's like he revolutionized baseball, Maury Wills.
I agree. I'm just saying that I don't know where the line is drawn that we can certifiably say this is why they don't want him in. I know that the gambling, yes, the whole basis of professional sports is the integrity of the game. And for you to say that you didn't gamble on it, and then we know that you did, throw all that away. The numbers alone, and again, I just said a moment ago, it's not the Hall of Stats, it's the Hall of Fame, but the numbers alone speak volumes that first ballot Hall of Famer, unanimous. Who's the one guy that didn't vote for Mariano Rivera? The one guy that didn't vote for Derek Jeter? Shame on that guy. Are you kidding me?
Hank Aaron. Nobody. Yeah. There's people that didn't vote for him.
How do you not do that? It boggles my mind. But if it's close, Dale Murphy, for example, there's still folks that are going, come on his merit, yes, and a great guy and a really good player. No, he didn't have 400 home runs. I see that argument, but there's no argument about Pete except for the fact that outside of,
I believe now. Barry Bonds, I knew his father real well and everything, and I've met Barry, but a lot of people don't like him and everything. That's fine, but I think he belongs in the Hall of Fame. I think Mark McGwire belongs in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely.
I think Sammy Sosa belongs in the Hall of Fame. You just put an asterisk and say it was a steroid era. But why would you not have the greatest in the game that carry? Mark McGwire put baseball back on the map when they were, the guy, and he was taking steroids when they weren't illegal.
Correct.
Steroids were like taking vitamin pills for those guys back then. Okay.
No
now some of these guys
it.
like A-Rod took it after they became illegal.
Yep.
So I understand. But when he was taking them, they weren't illegal. Why would Mark McGwire not be in the Hall of Fame? I mean, why is Roger Clemens not in the guy won 7 Cy Young Awards? Come on. And do you think he was taking steroids his whole career? If he could take them, it was near the end of his career. But these people are, that they're punishing people, and that's not up to me. The Hall of Fame should be for the, to recognize people what they did in the baseball field. That's just me.
Yeah. And there are several players that we don't know whether or not they took anything.
I know for a fact.
And they are in.
Piazza, everybody in his team knew he was taking steroids. He's in the Hall. Ivan Rodriguez took steroids. Biggio and Bagwell took steroids. They're in the Hall of Fame. Come on. There's so many people, but that's what I'm trying to say. So to me now, the Hall of Fame, when Casey went in 66, he went in with Ted Williams. That was an honor. That was a big honor. But to me, the Hall of Fame it's not a big deal anymore to me. That's just to me. Yeah. The players, Pete Rose, do you think I look at Pete Rose any different than if he was in the Hall of Fame or not in the Hall of Fame? One of the great, now think about it. He started an all-star game at 5 different positions. Never been done.
I know.
He started an all-star game at 5 different positions. So, you can go on and on and on.
For me personally, because I'm a Dodger fan, I hated Pete Rose.
Oh, of course.
It's almost Dodgers and Yankees, cats and dogs.
Johnny Bench, you hated the whole bunch.
I hated them because they were so good, but I respect them even to this day because they were so good. And so I would love to be able to be with Tommy Lasorda, arm in arm, going, we don't want Pete in because he was the bad guy. He was our enemy. But for the sake of baseball and for the sake of just, what would you call it? The justification of the argument, any of the numerous records that he has, they speak for themselves. And you're right, Bob.
There's guys like, for example, Lasorda won 2 World Series in 20 years of managing, correct?
Yes.
Danny Murtaugh won 2 World Series in 11 years of managing for the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Right.
Is he in the Hall of Fame?
No.
It's a lot of politics and stuff that go with it. And I'm not a political guy. So.
Yeah. But the fame in the Hall of Fame is the thing that Pete, you can't dispute it. That, Mark the Bird Fidrich did something for the game to make it fun to watch. Is this guy going to groom? Is this guy going to groom the mound? I just want to watch him talk to the baseball for a couple of minutes because
that was terrific. You're right. That was more fun watching him pitch.
Yeah, Al Raboski having a temper tantrum right before the first pitch that he would throw. Little things that make baseball just amazing. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird did it for basketball. Yeah. We know that the sport was dying a very slow death from a television standpoint before they got there, and Pete did the same for baseball.
Yeah,
he did the same. Made it fun to watch. Charlie Hustle. Didn't Mickey Mantle come up with that? Hey, and then Charlie Hustle's over there getting
it was Whitey Ford, actually.
Was it Whitey? Okay, yeah.
Exhibition game in Florida, yeah.
Yeah, amazing stuff. Well, we haven't talked about Anthony Davis yet. I know that you have some insight on him that I was at the Notre Dame SC 74 game. 55 unanswered points against the number 3 team in the country in 17 minutes of game time. He doesn't win the Heisman Trophy. Let's talk a little bit about your influence with the USC and your love for the Trojan, not only baseball, football, the campus.
Let me just tell you about AD. I just talked to AD yesterday for 45 minutes.
Okay.
He's doing great. He's working for a SC donor that owns a real estate company in Orange County. He's doing really good.
Please invite him on our show. I would love to visit with him if he would be so kind as to.
Are you kidding? He knows Steve. He would be on in 2 seconds.
Oh my gosh!
I can get him on your next show. But anyway, he's a great guy. But AD, now think about this. I met AD originally. Casey Stengel and I used to go to the SC baseball games. There he is, and he was a tremendous baseball player. He was drafted 3 times in the big leagues.
Oh my gosh!
Now think about this. At San Fernando High School,
yep,
he was in 1970. He's the only player in the history that was voted Player of the Year in baseball and football the same year. Never been done before in the history of the San Fernando Valley in the city schools.
Yeah, and there's a guy named John Elway that played just right down the street at Granada Hills that played both sports, and he didn't get it either. Yeah, I'm sorry.
So AD could hit, he could run. You know, now Don Buford was a little guy, and he played many years in the big leagues from SC. He was a football player. Rod Dato has always told me that AD should have not played football. He should have played baseball, and he could have had a 15-year major league career. That's how good he was. He could hit, he could run, he could throw, he could hit for power. You know, I mean, he's just an amazing athlete, you know, and that game you were at, I was at that game, and I've told people, now think about this, I've been to 7 Super Bowls. I've been to 25 Rose Bowl games. I've been to every high school Hall of Fame. I had Rams season ticket. That's the greatest game I've ever been to. That 1974 comeback game. There was probably 90,000 people that didn't sit down in the second half.
Yeah,
they did not sit down.
I know.
Okay, it was Charlie Phillips intercepts that pass for a touchdown after AD runs, and it was 20. I think it was 28-4 or 6 at halftime.
Yes,
and
24-6, 24.
Yeah,
yes.
And they came back 54-24, and Notre Dame was number 1 in the country, and it was for the national championship, and it was unbelievable what he did, you know. And he scored 6 touchdowns against him his sophomore year, and he scored 4 in that game. But that game, he was like on fire, and you know, AD. That's the other thing. He went from there. He signed with the Southern California Sun. Now think about this. He played with Pat Hayden and Darryl LeMonique as the quarterbacks, and he led the World Football League in rushing. He led it in rushing. I think he had 1,600 yards, led it in scores, and then he went to the Tampa Bay Bucks, and he got hurt because they had such a horrible offensive line. He and Ricky Bell were never the same. They were both in that same team.
Yep.
And he was never the same runner, even though he still played with the Rams and played a few, but he was never the same. The Anthony Davis that played in the World Football League, that was AD. And if the Rams, Carroll Rosenbluth wanted him to be the running back with Cullen Bryant. And what happened when Rosenbluth got whacked by the mob in the ocean, that the next thing was that AD was kind of forgotten about because it was Carroll Rosenbluth's plan to have him running with Cullen Bryant. And that would have been, I think he would have done good because the Rams had a good offensive line there.
We just lost Bob Irsay just a while ago, but the relationship between Jim Irsay and Rosenbluth, where they were drinking buddies and they go, I don't like my team, and I don't like my team, and let's switch. And they did it. They just switched teams. They just switched ownership of the teams because they were drunk and they were mad at each other's performances from
100%.
It's so stupid. Again, something that could never take place today. That was folklore from the past. I still remember the LA Times, the Sunday after the 72 SC Notre Dame game. Again, this is in California. LA Times goes Davis 6 times.
That was I didn't think you were that old. That was one of the best headlines I've ever seen.
Isn't it? Yeah. Just, gosh. Yeah, but Clay Matthews was a freshman on that 74 team, and Clay and I played together in Atlanta for a while, and we talk every now and then. I haven't visited with him.
He works out at the same gym I work out.
Yeah, you know Clay?
I live in Westlake Village. He lives in Agoura.
Oh my gosh, what a career that man had. Again, another Hall of Famer without a doubt. 19 years as a inside linebacker.
19 years.
Yeah, are you kidding me?
And his calves, I see him in shorts. His calves are like rocks.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy's got the biggest calves I've ever seen. You know what I mean? It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got dancer's legs. If you want to, like Reznikov.
He's also a very humble, nice guy too.
Yeah. Well, he says that, okay, at halftime, there's a difference of opinion about how the story exactly goes. But, the referees knock on the door and they go, hey, coach, you got 2 minutes, and then your team's got to be out.
Yeah,
So
right.
the offensive coordinators are visiting and they're talking to the quarterbacks and the receivers, and the defensive guys are talking about some stuff. And then McKay shuts them all up. And he goes, hey, guys, Anthony, AD, where are you? And he was in the back somewhere. He raised his hand. I'm right here, coach. He goes, all right, we're going to turn this game around. AD, you're going to take this one back for a touchdown, and we're going to be right back in this ball game. Let's go beat them.
Hey, let me ask you guys. I was a college football fan my whole life. I'm not anymore. With they're making millions of dollars and everything, and there's no Trojans. These guys are there 1 year. They're from Alabama. They don't know what it means like to be a Trojan. Those days are over with, man. They're gone. It's like pro football now. To me, it's like minor league football. I don't look at it like, oh, college kids going to college. And I used to take SC players out to lunch, and I had to make sure nobody saw me pick up the tab,
right?
Because they'd be in trouble. Now they're making millions of dollars. They should be taking me out to lunch. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, it's like unbelievable.
And if you don't make them happy, they'll leave and they'll go somewhere else tomorrow.
A guy can be starting if he doesn't like the way, what, Ed, Coach O was a dear friend of mine. We'd go to the recruit dinner and he'd sit at our table with Brian Kennedy. He'd say, well, I've been kissing their ass for 6 months to get them to be Trojans. Now the honeymoon's over. They're, when they signed to go to SC. Now think about this. Yeah. Now, when they sign to go to SC is when you got to start kissing up to them.
That's right.
Because if they don't like you, they'll be at UCLA the next Saturday.
It never stops. The recruiting.
And these high school kids' parents want to be millionaires. They think, now think about it. If you're an agent for a high school player and he's at SC, you can get more money if you can get him to go to Fresno State or get him to go to Notre Dame. So why wouldn't you try to talk him out of leaving SC? Do you understand what I'm saying?
And throw in, what's the motivation when you do get drafted, when you might be making less money, depending on your draft pick? Yeah. What's your motivation to play hard on Sundays if you're already spoiled enough on Saturdays? Hey, Bob, what was harder with Ed Orgeron, to understand through that gravelly, deep voice or through that Cajun accent? Did you need a translator to break down everything that Ed was saying to you?
Hey, Brian Kennedy tried to get SC from the days of Pat Hayden, Lynn Swan's the worst leadership in the history of the school. And Brian Kennedy told them to hire him as the head coach, told them, the players in my life, you can check this out, they were crying when they didn't name him the head coach. The players were crying. They loved Coach O.
Love him.
They loved him. So what happens? Yeah. He goes to LSU and has arguably the greatest college team in the history of college sports. Okay. Yeah. Arguably the greatest team ever. Okay. And wins the national championship. And what did Pat Hayden say? Oh, he doesn't have the image for SC. Come on, Pat. Where's Pat now? It's like these people, I'm telling you, they didn't know anything about, and Lynn Swan was the worst athletic director in the history of SC.
Within 3 years, Ed takes a very good LSU team into a powerhouse
100%
juggernaut that offensively nobody could stop.
And that quarterback who Ohio State got rid of, when he took the Heisman Trophy at the award dinner, he credited to Coach O for believing in him and naming him the starting quarterback.
Yep. Well, think of how great Ed was for Pete Carroll. Being the yes man, and he helped bring more great guys. I don't know if it was the yin and the yang where one was the good cop, bad cop, but I think Ed was so good at just being able to kid around with a guy just enough to let him know that I love you, I want to be a part of you, and I'm going to tease you because that's what men do, right? We've touched.
Hey, Harper, were you with the Atlanta Falcons?
Yes.
Was Whitey Zimmerman there then?
Love Whitey.
Oh, you knew him? Was he there
gosh,
then? I loved Whitey.
Whitey would begin just about every sentence. Oh, hell. Hey, Whitey, how you doing? Oh, hell. I had a rough night last night. Yeah. Now, Bobby Hebert was the last player to see Whitey. He stayed a little bit late that night. Bobby was always late. Bobby would take his time, and he'd leave the water running for 2 hours before he'd go shave and then take a shower. And they turn. When you're from Louisiana, water's not a problem. You're in California, it's completely different. But Bobby, again, the last to see him, and Bobby played with Ed. at Northwestern State. So they had
Wow.
Mark Duper, Joe Delaney, Ed Orgeron, and Bobby Aber were all part of the same offense together at a Division II school in northwestern Louisiana. And Bobby can't say enough about what a fantastic teammate and great person, a guy that you would want in front of you if you were a quarterback. Ed Orgeron would eat somebody's leg before he would let
right.
you get tackled. You know what I mean? Just one of those types of guys. You need an Ed Orgeron on your team.
100%.
And what he did for Pete and to get that SC program with the Bush and the line art days, it just classic. And how anyone could say, yeah, he's really not an SC guy. Unbelievable.
You're 100% correct.
Unbelievable. It's atrocious to deal with that type of mismanagement that they had. They had the golden goose right there in front of them, and they let it slip away. They strangled it themselves. It's amazing. All right, thank you for sharing a couple of your SC stories. I greatly appreciate it. And you know what? I don't hate UCLA. What an amazing campus. It's a great, but UCLA didn't want it. They didn't touch my heart the same way that SC has.
No, I understand. I'm the same way.
And so many amazing players that have gone through there. Bob, tell us what you're doing now.
Right now, I'm involved with. I do some work with some auction houses. They have me appraising, looking at stuff, memorabilia and stuff. And I currently work still in boxing with Bruce Trampler, who's a Hall of Fame matchmaker for Top Rank. I do a lot of work with him, and I still, down at Freddie Roach's gym all the time on Vine Street, and I'm still involved. But I'm just kind of, cooling it. I'm still working. But I always say the mind is like any other muscle. If you don't use it, it will atrophy. So.
Yep. The old expression: if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. Do me a favor. Tell me how the world of assessing values to items that have been autographed or memorabilia that it can be authenticated. I think that's a very, very corrupt world. I'm not saying that about you personally at all. I'm just saying I know for a fact.
Oh, you're 100% right.
I saw it firsthand. Somebody signed Dan Marino's autograph to a football, and it was sent to somebody else, and I know it's fake. How do you manage or try to? You're never going to get rid of it, but how do you make it better? How can we improve that world?
Whenever you have money involved in anything, you get corruption. For example, now think about it. When I worked for the Angels, we kept a garbage, like a tin garbage can, aluminum garbage can, and every cracked bat, every homestand, we'd put in the garbage can, and then I would take them out to the trash at the end of the homestand and dump them in the bins. Okay. The jerseys after the season, we'd send to the minor leagues. I'd pack them up, we'd box them up, we'd send them to the minor leagues. They were dirty laundry, and the bats were broken bats. Today, that dirty laundry would be worth a fortune.
Yeah.
It would be worth a. Now, Tony Oliva hit a home run off Don Drysdale in the 65 World Series. It was getaway day, and they were playing at Dodger Stadium. Well, after the game, I knew he wasn't going to use the jersey again because it was a road jersey, and they were going to end the series in Minnesota. So I actually took it. I have it to this day. His 65, he won the batting champion that year, and he hit a home run off Drysdale in the jersey I have. Right. Now, at the time, I wasn't taking it it was just because Tony was my guy, okay? And it was just a memory. All this stuff is now worth money. I mean, Casey gave me his World Series shirt from the Yankees. I've turned down, I don't even want to tell you how much money I've turned down from some guy in New York. But it's just laundry, and I would never sell anything at Casey's because he was like a father to me and a grandfather, So why would I say they can sell it when I'm gone, or my grandkids may want it, whatever. But the point is, money is not everything to me. I always say, money is, some of the wealthiest people I know are some of the most miserable people I know. Yeah. So money does not buy happiness, and it does not buy health, and it does not buy friendship, So the bottom line is, but what's happened now, they're selling bats. Ohtani's bats are going for there's a bat that's going to be in the National Sports Convention. It'll be $500,000 that he hit 4 home runs in the 50-50 year. $500,000. He wears a jersey a game. They sell them to Japan for over 120,000 a jersey, to 100, almost to 200. And some games he wears 2 jerseys. I wouldn't want one of those. Why would you want a jersey if they're wearing a jersey a game? You know, in the old days, you had 2 homes and 2 roads. Even in the 70s, in the 80s, in the Knicks, you only had 2 or 3 homes and 2 or 3 roads. Now they wear shirts everywhere, you know, and the MLB stickering everything and everything. It's just a, you know, to me, it's, you know, it's, some people have made, you know, I'm not going to lie, I've made money. I sold Mickey Mantle's flannel for a lot of money, you know, because I keep things of personal friends of mine. You know, Mantle was a friend of mine, but, you know, I got an offer I couldn't refuse, so I sold it. So, you know, and I've sold things over the years. I sold Clementi's jersey, Feller's jerseys, and other jerseys, you know, but because you can't keep everything, you know.
Right. Yeah. Frank Sinatra was visiting a friend of his in the hospital, and someone found out. There was a woman that walked into the room, and she goes, "I'm so sorry, gentlemen. I really don't mean to bother you, but Mr. Sinatra, I just wanted to say hi. My husband's in room 314 just down the hall, and he's seen every one of your movies. He has every one of your records. He just thinks you're the greatest ever. And I just wanted to say thank you for being here. I know you're here to see your friend, and I'm going to leave you now." And he goes, "Hey, lady, hold on a second. Hold on. Come here." And she walks over. She's kind of questioning, what did I do? He takes off these cufflinks that he wore, and he hands them to her, and he says, "Give those to your husband. I think he'll like them." She goes, "Oh my gosh, Mr. Sinatra, thank you. That's unbelievable. What do I owe you for these?" He goes, "Get out of here. I love you. Take care of it. You know, you're fine. Have a great day." She leaves. The buddy who he's seen, he goes, "Frank, that's your favorite pair of cufflinks. I've seen you wear those to some of the biggest events that you've been to. What on earth is going into you?" He goes, "Son, I'm just renting.
That's
I'm going to
exactly
let her
correct.
right now.
Everything we own today will be in somebody else's hands. I got one Frank Sinatra story for you.
Please."
1979. This is when I first had crew under contract. We're down at the Polo Grounds in Palm Springs. Okay, I see Leo DeRocher with an angel hat on over his bald head walk in with Jilly Rizzo, who was Frank Sinatra's bodyguard. Okay. Jilly's bringing him in. And then Leo talks to me. He says, "Yeah, Bobby, I was recovering from open heart surgery at Frank's compound." And I said, "Oh, that's great." And we sat there. Now, a reporter, this is an amazing thing. A reporter came up and said, "Mr. DeRocher, you roomed with Babe Ruth. You've seen them all in your life. Who would you say is the greatest player you ever saw?" And this is what he did. He goes, he smiled. He said, "There's only one." And what he said is, you can't dispute it or argue it. He said, "There's only one player I've ever seen on a 1 to 10 scale is a 10 in base running, in throwing assists, in fielding, hitting for average, and hitting for power. And that's Willie Mays." He said, "No other play." And now think about it. Can you say that about DiMaggio? Can you say it about Mickey Mantle? Can you say it about Ted Williams? Can you say it about Stan DiMaggio? Can you say it about Rogers Hornsby? Can you say it about? You can go right through the history of baseball.
Right.
You couldn't say it about Babe Ruth.
Right.
And Hank Aaron was the closest thing to him.
Yeah.
He just did it more lazy looking, and his hat didn't fall off. But Hank was right, I think, a notch behind him. But I thought that was very interesting. A 1 to 10 on all 5 categories. And somebody can say, "Well, what about Joe DiMaggio? Or what about Ted Williams wasn't a 10 in all 5 categories?"
He might have been a 9 or an 8 in one of them. You know, he's a 10 in most, but not a 10 in all. That's the difference maker that you're getting me to think about, right, Bob?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. You know, because the more I thought about it, you know, like these guys, I put Wade Boggs, Rod Carew, Tony Gwynn. I don't put them in the same class as I put Tony Oliva or Ted Williams or these guys. If they have if they're Big Joel McDonald was a reporter here. One day we were in the Angel locker room, and he's a big fat guy. He was probably 600 pounds, and he had a radio show here. Joel McDonald with Krikorian, and Carew said to him, "Hey Joe, when are you going to start eating some salad?" And Joe said, I'll never forget it, and the whole locker room laughed, and Crew didn't think it was funny. He said, when you get an RBI, and it's like, these I think batting average is great, but these guys that hit singles and hit 330, they're not as effective to me as a guy like the guys we talked about. To me, the greatest achievement is if you hit 300 and hit 400 or 500 home runs.
Yeah,
that's just unbelievable.
Yeah, you get Aaron Judge hitting 50 something home runs a year.
God, he's having a tremendous year,
isn't he? It's crazy how good he is.
I never knew how good. I've never met Freddie Freeman, never talked to him. I just saw him with the Braves. I never know how good he was until I've seen him every day now because I watch the Dodgers all the time.
Isn't it amazing?
What a great athlete he is. I mean, just a tremendous in and out hitter. He can go down the doubles. He's a double machine, left center, right center. I mean, he's tremendous.
Yeah. He works all fields. I saw him play in the minor leagues with Andrew McCutcheon. Andrew was with the Indiana Racers, whatever, their AAA team. And the Braves here in Atlanta, not too far from where I live, they were the Gwinnett Braves at the time. They're now the Stripers. That's the Braves AAA. And Freddie's a 6'5", probably weighed 114 pounds when you look at him. I mean, just skinny, really lean. But gosh, man, when the ball hits his bat, it makes a little bit of a different sound than some of the others. I'm not saying it's power, but next thing you know, he has no problem hitting the ball to the wall, and then he 100%. Stands on second base.
Absolutely.
But inside out, you know what? He'll take a pitch that strikes most people out.
He's the best I've seen in years doing that inside out. That's what he's the best at.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of just a little flick there at the very end. And, there are people here in Atlanta that are really still very upset that he left. And he's a traitor, and he just went for the money and all. And he took an offer, and he had a mismanagement. That's his agent didn't report the whole number, but he's from Los Angeles, or at least a little bit.
He's from Orange County. Orange County. Yeah.
My son played. Okay, so his brother Andrew was a coach on my son's travel team a couple of years ago. And I asked Andrew once, do you mind if I tell a quick story? I'm going to tell my Freddie Freeman story. Andrew played at a Christian college in Orange County, had 4 home runs, middle infielder, right? Second base, third, or shortstop. He could do it all. And a really good player. I watch him run. He's a little heavy, but he could run. And so I said one day, I go, hey, Andrew, what is Thanksgiving like at the Freeman house? I can't imagine how you guys bicker and argue and you have some fun and do whatever. He goes, let me tell you something. Freddie's hit 295 home runs right now in the majors, but you know who hit 4 home runs in college? My brother didn't go to college. I've got 4 home runs, more than he did in college, and I am the house champion for college home run hitting. And that bothers my brother like crazy. I go, what's he going to do? He goes, when he retires from baseball, he's going to go sign up at a junior college. He's going to play for 5 games, hit 4 home runs. When he hits the 5th, he's going to touch home plate and take his cleats off forever. And then he'll be the Freeman House champion for college as well. So competitive juices that flow in there, and brotherly love and hate and all that kind of stuff. It's fantastic. It's a story that everybody would love to hear and be a part of.
Right.
So just fun little stuff. Well, Bob, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for being with us. We've gone a little more than 2 hours. I said we weren't going to do that, so I guess I lied to you. I apologize for that.
Hey, I've enjoyed. If I was doing prison time, I'd like to have you guys my bunkmate because the time would fly.
We'd be out on the street after just a few years. I only had to spend a couple years. Now the guy smells.
Where's Steve? Is Steve still with us?
We lost Steve about 45 minutes ago. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty. He kind of turned into a blurb, and bloop, we lost him. And I thought he would rejoin us. He sent me a quick text. I said, "Come on back on." And unfortunately, I guess he's having a power outage there in Northern California. Great. Could we have you back on again sometime?
Pardon me?
Could we have you back on again sometime?
Absolutely, right, Harper. And when you come to LA, I'll take you to Malibu for lunch. Okay.
Well, I'll do a Casey Stengel, and I'll pick up the tab. How about that? Ever been to? I used to work at Gladstone's. Have you ever been to Gladstone's?
Oh, they're taking, Gladstone's, the fire. I don't think it got Gladstone's, but it took away. Mastro's burnt down. Did you ever go to? We lost so many restaurants. Ryan O'Neill was a dear friend of mine. He lived on 21638 PCH. The whole home burned down. Thank God he wasn't alive to see it. But his son Patrick, who's an announcer, was taking care of everything, and everything's gone.
My uncle, who has passed away, had a condominium that burnt. The people who've rebought it, and then we have a second cousin who lives in Malibu. Their house, they're living in somebody else's home until someone get this all figured out.
Right.
It's amazing.
Did you ever go to Moon Shadows? That burnt to the ground. That was a great
Absolutely. That and the Sea Lion a few times. I know it traded its ownership, but that used to be a part of the Gladstone's family of restaurants, along with some others. Well, I look forward to it. But Bob, thank you for a great time, a trip down memory lane, and a chance to revisit the history of the game, the fun portion of the game, the business of the game, of boxing, and of so many other different things that you've been a part of in your life. We greatly appreciate your time.
Well, it was my honor to be here, Harper, and thank you so much for asking me.
All right. Well, for Steven Travers, this is his show, and we call it Take 5 with Steven Travers. Obviously, we had some technical difficulties, everybody. We certainly appreciate your patience and your understanding as far as that goes, but I know Steven would have greatly valued being on for the entire show with a friend, with a mentor, with somebody that he absolutely loves and appreciates, and that's Bob Case, and we appreciate him being on the show as well. So for Logan Landers, our producer and engineer, I'm Harper LeBel saying thank you for tuning in, everybody. This has been another episode of 100 Yards. Again, Take 5 with Steven Travers. Have a fantastic rest of your day.